Chapter 172. It was under such a tense atmosphere that Yang Qindong entered the capital from the Yang family manor. It was the day of the return trip. He came to the Hu mansion with his new wife, Hu Yan, to visit his relatives. The inspection for leaving the city was very strict, but for entering the city, it was much more relaxed. This point was tantamount to slapping himself in the face, proving how ridiculous the so-called catching spies was. Since Yang Qindong became marquis, the lineup when he went out had become much larger. It was the same this time. The number of servants and guards alone had reached 30, and there were nearly 100 strong men and maids carrying boxes. From this point of view, Yang Qindong had already violated the rules. According to the law of the Great Ming Dynasty, a marquis could only take 8 attendants at most when he went out, but he had 30 guards. Even if he took more than 100 strong men and maids with him, the team was indeed too large. If it was in normal times, those Imperial censors would probably impeach him again. But now, the capital was in danger. Who was in the mood to worry about this? Of course, even in peacetime, Yang Qindong would not change what he had decided. He came to create rules, not to follow them. Besides, in order to marry Hu Yan, Yang Qindong had given Hu family at least 2 million things, which had once shocked the capital. But in the end, those were filial gifts from Yang Qindong, but this time, Hu Yan was filial to her parents. The meaning was naturally different. Of course, Hu Yan would feel proud and happy that so many good things were given to her family. But after all, she was already a member of the Yang family. Out of consideration for her husband, she still said the words of refusal. In this regard, Yang Qindong reached out to scratch her nose and said with a smile, "Silly girl, you are my woman now. So what if I give you some things? Besides, your 6th son has nothing but a lot of money. Don't worry. After these things are given out, your 6th son will not become poor." This little joke made Hu Yan inexplicably happy, and her nose was a little sore. Although money might not be able to prove anything, wouldn't taking care of his face and being forthright and magnanimous prove his importance? Thinking of this, she sighed that she had married the right person and chosen the right man. The vast army entered the capital. If it were any other time, such a scene would definitely attract a lot of onlookers, and even a lot of discussions and gossip. At the same time, it would also garner a lot of envious gazes. But at this time, everyone was thinking about how to leave the capital to take refuge. Who would have the time to care about such trivial matters and watch such a show? Seated in the spacious and luxurious carriage, Yang Qindong would occasionally look out the window, gathering all the information in his mind and gaining a more direct understanding of the situation in the capital. Hu Yan nestled in Yang Qindong's arms. It was rare that there was no one else in the carriage, so she became somewhat unrestrained. She completely disregarded her reserved appearance and leaned her head against Yang Qindong's chest, feeling the strong and powerful heartbeat with a face full of happiness. When the carriage stopped in front of the Hu estate and Hu Yan got off, her face was still flushed with happiness. When she saw her mother waiting in the hall, she excitedly ran over. In the Imperial court, the atmosphere today was exceptionally tense. In the past, in order to express his majesty, the emperor would first listen to the memorials of his subordinates, and then give a few suggestions when he had an idea, demonstrating his supreme authority. But today, before the officials could speak, even after they had just knelt down and chanted "Long live the emperor," he asked anxiously, "Dear officials, do you have any ideas about the candidate to lead the army and the strategy to retreat the enemy? Do you all have any ideas?" Thus, the entire court fell silent. If one were to say that a great Confucian scholar who knew the 4 books and 5 classics, he could naturally name many people. But when it came to driving back the enemy and leading the army, how could it be so easy? Speaking of which, it had been a long time since there had been a major foreign war. Even if there were some wars, they were only small skirmishes or internal conflicts. For those kinds of battles, as long as the enemy was pressured, there was no need for any techniques. But this time, facing the elite cavalry of Walla who had repeatedly defeated them, hundreds of thousands of troops were thrown in twice, and the result was a great defeat, which led to a situation where there was a shortage of soldiers. So, how could they resist the enemy? Not to mention that recommending a candidate to be an official and a general were 2 completely different things. When recommending an official, even if the other party was not qualified, they could casually find a reason and say that they did not know the official very well to get away with it. At most, they could bribe the officials and use some money, and the matter would be resolved as a small matter. But recommending a general to fight against the powerful army of Walla, if they did not do well, they would lose their heads, and even worse, the recommender would also be punished. So, who would do such a recommendation easily? On one hand, they did not want to cause trouble, but more importantly, they did not have a suitable candidate in mind. In their eyes, the Tile army that even Ingzong himself could not defeat was already an undefeatable army. An army that no one could defeat. The officials were all mute and did not make a sound. This made the emperor anxious, and Zhu Qiyu angry. What? You don't even have a suitable candidate? You claim to be the pillars of the country, and according to you, you have everything in the world in your hands, and you are omnipotent, but now, is it so difficult to recommend a person to lead the army? If that's the case, are you lying to me? In anger, Zhu Qiyu wanted to label the officials as deceiving the emperor. In this way, even if he used this reason to kill a few officials, the others would not be able to say anything. Feeling the anger of the emperor, the officials were panicking, and at the same time, they looked at each other, and then quickly transitioned in their minds to a candidate to lead the army. But no matter how hard they thought, it was difficult to find a suitable person. What? Seeing that the officials still did not say a word, in anger, Zhu Qiyu decided to kill a few people as a sacrifice to the flag. Some people were like this. If they were not forced to this point, they would not know how powerful they were. Just as Zhu Qiju's gaze swept over and was thinking about who to kill to make an example, someone in the crowd suddenly said, "Emperor, this official has a candidate to recommend." Who are you recommending? Come forward. Zhu Qiyu, who was about to explode, suddenly saw hope, and was naturally very happy. His eyes searched, and his voice became very anxious. As you wish. The newly appointed vice minister of Taichung Temple, Su Yozhen, who had received the emperor's order, stepped forward with a face full of confidence. The officials were also curious about who stepped forward at this time. But when they saw that it was Su Yozhen, who was in charge of the sacrifice, they all showed a puzzled expression. This person used to be an imperial censor, although he had impeached some people, and had a slight reputation. But in the end, he was not a ranked official, and it was difficult for him to enter the eyes of others. If it were not for the two emperors this time, it would be impossible for him to be promoted from a 6th-rank official to a 4th-rank vice minister of Taichung Temple. Yesterday, this person had been in the limelight once, and at that time, his colleagues had a whole new level of respect for him. They did not expect that he would speak again today. Could it be that he really had a suitable candidate in mind to lead the army? Could it be that he was really a person with a military strategy? Under the gaze of the officials, under the eager eyes of the emperor, Su Yozhen, who was holding the ceremonial tablet, stepped forward with a face full of confidence, knelt and said, "This official recommends a person. He has fought with the Walla cavalry, and has not been defeated, and retreated unscathed. With him, the so-called small foreign tribes are not a problem, and can be swept away like a spider web in a room." Su Yozhen's flattery made the ministers in the imperial court even more surprised. Who had fought with the Walla army and not been defeated? Even Shi Hung, who was given the title of Taidu and Wuqing Count, was also defeated. Could it be that there was really a general more powerful than this person? If it was true, why hadn't they heard of it? The officials were puzzled, but the emperor, Zhu Qiyu, did not think much about it. Right now, he was anxious to find a way to solve the problem, as long as he could force the enemy to retreat. As for where he came from and what his current position was, he did not care about it. Good. My great Ming is really full of talents, but I don't know the name of this person. Where is he now? What is his official position? Zhu Qiyu asked anxiously, but Su Yozhen answered indifferently, replying to the emperor, "This person is now in the capital, Yangchundong, the loyal marquis." Su Shaoqing, be careful with your words. Among the officials, someone quickly made a reproachful attitude. This person was an important official in the court, the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao. Yang Qindong married his granddaughter, and the two families had a very close relationship. Now that someone recommended his grandson-in-law to lead the army to war, of course, he would be unhappy. This was war, and people would die, not doing business. At worst, it would just be a loss of money. That's right, Su Shaoqing, don't be too impatient. This is leading the army to war, a matter of national importance, not a place to settle personal grudges. Hu Zhongning also stood in the court. In order to solve the crisis, Zhu Qiyu had specially ordered all the 5th-rank officials in the capital to come to court. As the imperial guardian of the embroidered uniform guard,
He naturally had the qualifications to stand here.
He was already Yang Qindong's father-in-law, so he naturally could not ignore his son-in-law's matters. His words directly pointed out that there was a problem with Su Yozhen's motives. In fact, most people in the court remembered that when Su Yozhen was still an imperial censor, he had once impeached Yang Qindong for going to the red light district. After that, although Yang Qindong was unharmed, he was promoted.
With this precedent as an example, it was no wonder that Hu Zhongning would think this way and even dare to point it out in front of the court.
Su Yozhen, who was being rebuked by both Hu Xiao and Hu Zhongning, did not panic in the slightest.
On the contrary, he maintained a slight smile and said, "Yes, when this official was an imperial censor, I truly did impeach the loyal marquis, but that was only out of duty, not because of personal grudges. Now, this official is recommending the loyal marquis both out of duty and to repay the emperor's kindness in recognizing my worth.
Moreover, this official can take responsibility for his words. If the loyal marquis is unable to stop the enemy outside the capital, this official is willing to take full responsibility." Chapter 173. Take full responsibility. When he said this, the entire court was in an uproar. This was no longer a recommendation, but a bet on his own life. If he didn't have enough confidence, how would he dare to do such a thing? For a moment, all the officials looked at each other. No one dared to doubt whether Su Yozhen had bad motives. After all, if you wanted to harm your enemy or opponent, there were many ways. But he wouldn't choose this kind of responsible statement. Wasn't that taking the initiative to jump into a sinking ship and seeking his own death? Su Yozhen's words made all the officials speechless. There was a feeling of speechlessness and they didn't know what to say. Zhu Qiyu, who saw all of this, was very happy in his heart. Regardless of whether Yang Qindong was suitable to lead the army or not, at least someone had recommended a candidate. This was a good sign. He looked at Su Yozhen with a praising gaze and said, "Good, Minister Su is loyal to the country, your heart is praiseworthy. But I don't know how you are so sure that the Marquis of Loyalty can take on this heavy responsibility? Your Majesty, please allow this official to report." After receiving Yang Qindong's reply yesterday, he also received a lot of information from the Security Bureau. After sorting it out, he also thought about what to say for half a night. Now that it was time to show off, he immediately boasted in front of Dai Zong and all the officials. From Su Yozhen's mouth, everyone knew that Yang Qindong saved Ding Zong, Kuang Yi, Wang Zhua and the other 9 officials. Only then did they know that the Marquis of Loyalty didn't rely on luck, but a mercenary army with a high price. They were using the latest firearms, which were not difficult to fire continuously. Moreover, they were extremely accurate. It was because of this army of 100 people that they were able to save the lives of Ying Zong and the others in the chaos. This was the reason why they were given the title of Count of Loyalty and Courage. After explaining the situation in detail, Su Yozhen immediately kowtowed to the ground and vowed to Zhu Qizhen, "Your Majesty, this official is willing to use my life and the dozens of people in my family as a guarantee. If we can invite the Marquis of Loyalty and the mercenary army, it isn't impossible to withdraw the elite army of the Walla. This official asks for your Majesty's decree." His voice was impassioned and powerful, reverberating throughout the entire palace. Every word and sentence passed into the ears of the emperor and the officials, but at this time, no one agreed. It was obvious that everyone was digesting what Su Yozhen had said and the information she had brought to them. Zhu Qiyu also didn't immediately make a decision. Su Yozhen's words alone were not enough to determine if Yang Qindong really had such an ability. This was a battle to protect the capital. If he made a mistake, he would lose everything he had in his life. If he lost this battle and the capital fell to the enemy, even if he killed Yang Qindong and Su Yozhen, what use would it be? He needed to think about it carefully, so he fell into deep thought. Ji Ning, who was extremely observant, saw that Zhu Qiyu hadn't spoken for a long time. She reminded him in a small voice, "Your Majesty, is it possible to withdraw from court first and discuss this matter at court tomorrow morning?" "Oh, let's end the court session." Zhu Qiyu nodded mechanically. Immediately, a drake-like voice rang out, "Court dismissed." The Hu estate. Yang Qindong had been sitting in the main hall, accompanied by the chief steward of the Hu estate. When Hu Xiao and Hu Zhongning returned, the 3 of them greeted each other. "Everyone else is dismissed." Hu Xiao glanced at the steward and Tiger's mane, who had been standing by Yang Chendong's side like a javelin. The steward withdrew. Tiger's Mane also withdrew after receiving a signal from Yang Chendong.
When only the three of them were left in the room, Hu Xiao took the initiative to speak.
Loyal Marquis, do you know that someone recommended you to lead the army in the battle against the Walla? Hu Xiao asked directly, his sharp gaze piercing straight into Yang Chendong's heart.
It was unimaginable that an old man in his 70s had so much experience in dealing with the world and pleasing countless people.
Let alone a young man who wasn't even 20 years old. Such a gaze would make even an old official of the same court panic. Even Hu Zhongning, who was seated next to Hu Xiao, felt a wave of pressure wash over him. However, towards this, Yang Chendong was neither anxious nor slow, and his expression was incomparably indifferent.
It was as if these words were not directed at him.
Thank you for your concern, old master. Chendong is truly guilty. Calling Hu Xiao old master was not a common title at the time. This form of address caused Hu Xiao's expression to freeze. His sharp gaze and stern expression seemed to have faded a lot at this moment. Hu Xiao's aura was no longer overbearing.
Yang Chendong spread out his hands and spoke with a sincere expression. Old master, father-in-law has something to ask, so I naturally do not dare to hide it.
Su Yozhen's intentions are my intentions. What do you mean? Yang Chendong's reply caused Hu Zhongning's expression to stiffen. He did not quite understand. On the other hand, his father, Hu Xiao, quickly understood everything. His gaze was filled with obvious surprise. Su Yozhen is one of your people? When did this happen? Has she ever impeached you before? She has been one of my people since before the impeachment. Yang Chendong spoke extremely calmly, as if he was talking about something insignificant. There was not the slightest hint of pride. Controlling a rank 4 official of the Imperial court was something to be proud of.
However, no matter how one looked at it, he did not seem to care at all. It was as if everything was right and proper.
This. Hu Zhongning finally understood. Of course, his face was filled with shock. Hu Dan was also shocked by these words.
However, he had been in the Imperial court for so many years after all. He quickly understood the crux of the matter.
He was also incomparably shocked, but he did not show it on his face.
Just by looking at his ability to maintain his composure, it was unknown how much better he was than his son.
So that's how it is. It seems that this old man has worried too much. But you arranged for Su Yozhen to do this? How confident are you? Hu Xiao knew that Yang Chendong was playing a very big game of chess, but he did not know exactly what he was going to do.
He only knew that this grandson-in-law of his was filled with confidence. I don't dare to hide it from old master.
I am 100% confident, Yang Chendong respectfully replied while inwardly praising Hu Xiao's reaction and judgment.
100%?
This answer also startled Hu Xiao. His eyes lit up as if he was going to re-evaluate Yang Chendong at this moment. Since ancient times, no one had dared to say that they were 100% confident in war. Even if they knew that victory was certain, they would only say that they were 99% confident. This was all because reality was unpredictable and constantly changing. This was especially true when it came to war. Often, if one did not consider everything thoroughly, it could change the entire situation. Who dared to say that they were 100% confident? Yang Chendong was so sure, without the slightest bit of impetuousness. It didn't seem like he was speaking without thinking. Didn't that mean that he really had thought about it long ago and was prepared long ago? But what was he relying on? I heard that you hired an army of 100 people. Those people have firearms that our great Ming dynasty does not have. With them, you were able to successfully rescue Yingzong. Is this true? Hu Xiao began to wonder where Yang Chendong's confidence came from. The first thing he asked was what Su Yozhen said. It is true. Yang Chendong replied in a resolute tone. I did hire an army. They also have firearms that are many times more advanced than our great Ming dynasty. With them, they have no problem dealing with the Walla cavalry. But what? Hu Zhongning, who was listening intently, asked anxiously. It's just that the cost of hiring them is too high. Every time they complete a mission, it costs 10,000 taels per person. Moreover, it costs at least 1,000,000 taels per person. In other words, even if you only hire one person, you have to pay 1,000,000 taels of silver to hire them. Sigh, it's really a waste of money. Yang Chendong said while shaking his head, indicating that he could not bear the burden. So much. Hu Zhongning was also shocked by the high cost. 100 people cost 1,000,000 taels of silver.
Didn't that mean that the money needed to hire 100 people could support an army of a few 100,000 people at the border for a year?
Yes, it's that much. Moreover, it's impossible to negotiate the price.
This is because I have done business with them before and have some credibility. If it were someone else, I'm afraid that even if they paid, they would not be able to hire them.
Yang Chendong lowered his head and let out a long sigh. His expression showed that he could not bear the burden anymore. Admitting that Su Yozhen was one of his people was the sincerity that Yang Chendong showed to the Hu clan. Since they were all relatives, it would not be good to hide some things. If people knew about it in the future, how would they meet each other?
But even if they were relatives, there were some things that could be said and some things that could not be said.
For example, the mercenary army was originally his own army.
He did not need to spend any money at all, and they would completely obey his orders.
Yang Chendong would not tell Hu Shao about this. Not only that, but he also had to pretend that it was very difficult.
Only in this way would the old man speak up for him at the crucial moment.
It could also be said that Yang Chendong was willing to say so much to Hu Shao because he wanted to use his mouth to persuade Zhu Qiyu, and let him know that only he had the strength to reverse the situation. Only in this way could the other party come to him and he could ask for an exorbitant price. When Yang Chendong did things, he had always done things step by step. Even people like Hu Shao would often inadvertently be used by him. By the time he reacted, he would often not know whether to laugh or cry. At lunchtime, the atmosphere seemed to have returned to normal, but Hu Ming and Hu Zhongning both seemed to have a lot on their minds. Yang Chendong, on the other hand, kept sitting there with a modest smile, which made Hu Yen glare at him fiercely, but then her eyes became incomparably warm. Hu Yen did not know what Yang Chendong said to her grandfather and father, but she was sure of one thing, and that was that he would definitely not harm her family. Chapter 174. This time, Hu Yen brought back so many good things. Compared to the other married sisters, her face was full of glory, and she received many envious gazes from the crowd. And all of this was brought to her by Yang Chendong. How could she be dissatisfied? After a seemingly quiet lunch, Hu Yen bid farewell to her parents and family and left the Hu estate with Yang Chendong. After watching them leave, Hu Zhongning asked eagerly, "Father, can I send someone to investigate him?" The governor of the Brocade Guard originally had the power to investigate cases. This time, he planned to use his power to understand his son-in-law. You can't. Zhongning. Remember this. Although he is not as old as you, he is meticulous, far-sighted, and far-sighted. Even I can't compare to him. If you want to do anything, you won't be able to hide from him. If you do this, it will only hurt the relationship between the two of you. It is meaningless. Hu Chong shook his head and gave a high evaluation of Yang Chendong. Hu Zhongning didn't expect his father to think so highly of Yang Chendong. Although he was a little unconvinced, he was used to listening to his father's orders for a long time. This made him immediately dispel the idea of doing anything. Okay, I won't do anything.
But father, how will I explain this to the emperor in the morning court tomorrow?
This. Father will have to think about it carefully. The news came too suddenly. It was so sudden that Hu Chong couldn't completely digest it, let alone think of a way to deal with it. Imperial Palace. When Zhu Qiyu saw Jining appear in front of him, he immediately ignored his status as the emperor and got up. He asked anxiously, "How is it? Did you find out anything?"
Replying to your majesty, this subject has sent out a lot of spies and obtained proof that the loyal marquis really has a very elite army by his side.
In order to avoid alerting the enemy and to avoid causing a misunderstanding between the two sides, our people did not come into close contact with them and did not see what the new firearms looked like. However, there is one thing that can be confirmed, and that is the existence of new firearms. This has been confirmed through some of the things that have happened. Jining wiped the sweat from his forehead as he answered Zhu Qiyu's question. He gave off the feeling that he had worked very hard to obtain this information in such a short time. But in reality, he had already experienced the new firearms before, so he naturally knew that everything was true. Hearing that there was indeed a new type of firearm, Zhu Qiyu saw a glimmer of hope. That's impossible. What if we make it ourselves? If it's really as powerful as you say, with such firearms, why should we be afraid of others? Human nature was greedy. After knowing the benefits of the new firearms, Zhu Qiyu started to have ideas about it.
Perhaps it was because of his identity as the emperor that he had the misconception that everything under the heavens belonged to the emperor, and that all the good things under the heavens should belong to him.
Jining had thought of this before, and she had paid a heavy price for it. She naturally knew that this path would not work. Faced with Zhu Qiyu's wishful thinking, she could only say, "Your Majesty, I'm afraid this won't be easy." "What do you mean?" Hearing that the matter was impossible, displeasure appeared on Zhu Qiyu's face.
Jining was stared at by that stern gaze and her entire body tensed. She knew that if she did not explain the matter clearly, she was afraid that the emperor would hold a grudge against her. If she was not careful, he might even replace her and find someone more obedient to take power. Eunuchs were close officials of the emperor. Naturally, they enjoyed the benefits of being in a favorable position. This was also the main reason why they could become powerful and even have real power.
At the same time, eunuchs relied on the emperor's favor. Once they lost the support, they were nothing. They would be chewed up by those officials in an instant, and not even a scrap of bone would be left. Jining was well aware of the reasoning behind this. How could she dare to make Zhu Qiyu unhappy?
Seeing the emperor's dissatisfied expression, she hurriedly explained, "Your Majesty, think about it.
Those mercenaries saved Ingzong's life on the battlefield. How could he not see the value of these people? However, they were not used by him. This shows that this matter is difficult to accomplish.
As for how the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage used to convince those people, I'm afraid that we will need to investigate to find out."
Jining had no choice but to bring up Ingzong.
Perhaps in the eyes of this new emperor, only his former imperial brother could give him some pressure.
As expected. Hearing Jinying's explanation, Zhu Qiyu's expression became much more normal. Something that even his imperial brother could not do, it seemed normal that he could not do it. The new firearms were not easy to obtain, and the mercenaries would definitely not listen to him. Zhu Qiyu had no choice but to set his sights on Yang Chendong.
He had long heard of this gifted scholar, Yang Chendong, who he had even conferred the title of the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage, attracted Zhu Qiyu's attention.
"Beloved official, what do you think of the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage?" Hearing the emperor's thoughts change so quickly, Jining was startled at first, but quickly recovered. "Your Majesty, the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage is very talented. He also has the ability to earn money. He is a rare talent. However, how is his ability to command troops? This subject does not know." Jining had already encountered Yang Chendong more than once. Although the two of them hadn't interacted much, he had never profited from him. If possible, he really didn't want to provoke this kind of person.
However, since the emperor had asked, he still had to answer truthfully.
"That's right. This person's ability to earn money is very strong.
Regardless of whether it is in the immortal abode or in the realm beyond heaven, it is said that he is in existence who earns large sums of money every day.
Even that unremarkable Yang Bao, I heard that he also earns quite a bit of money. This kind of person is a talent, and should be used by us." Zhu Qiyu longed for someone with the ability to help him. When he thought back to today's morning court, when all the officials had been so helpless, he thought that perhaps if Yang Chendong had been present, the situation wouldn't have been so awkward. Hearing that Zhu Qiyu wanted to put Yang Chendong in an important position, Jining lightly shook his head.
"Your Majesty, this subject said before that the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage is very capable of earning money. Thus, rather than calling him an official or a scholar, it would be better to call him a merchant.
However, all merchants value profit over loyalty. No matter. It's good that he has a request. I'm afraid that a person has no desires. That way, we won't feel at ease using him."
"How about this, beloved official? Immediately go see the Marquis of Loyalty and ask him about the matter of asking him to go to war.
If he agrees, we will give him command of the army." Zhu Qiyu was truly decisive. He didn't doubt those he used and didn't use those he doubted. In this aspect, he was slightly better than Zhu Qizhen from Ingzong. At the very least, he wasn't so jealous.
Since the emperor had given the order, Jining knew that it was useless to say anything else.
He immediately nodded in agreement. This subject obeys. Soon after, just as Yang Chendong and Hu Yen returned to the Yang clan manor from the capital, Jining arrived. The current Jining was on the same level as Wang Zhen. His power was so great that few people could compare to him. His arrival naturally attracted Yang Chendong's personal welcome. Welcoming Jining was simply giving him face. As the saying went, if you're good, I'm good, everyone is good. Until he had enough soldiers to peacefully take over the great Ming dynasty, Yang Chendong didn't want to put on an aggressive front unless it was necessary. Yang Chendong and Jining were seated in the guest and host seats in a side hall. This had almost become a habit of Yang Chendong's.
As long as it was a eunuch or a lowly person, no matter how much power they had, he would not receive them in the main hall.
Those who could be received in the main hall were all people that Yang Chendong valued and admired. Jining naturally didn't know about this habit of Yang Chendong's. If he did, he would probably be burning with rage right now. Not only did he not know, but he also had a request to make. Upon seeing Yang Chendong, Jining became extremely courteous, maintaining a smile on his face.
This one was too busy the last 2 days and was unable to attend the wedding of the Marquis of Loyalty and Courage.
I am truly sorry. You're too kind. Eunuch Jin is accompanying His Majesty. How important is that?
Marquis marrying a wife is just a small matter.
Yang Chendong chuckled, appearing completely unconcerned. In truth, he hadn't even asked Jining for advice on his wedding day. There were times when Yang Chendong would accommodate others for the sake of the greater good. For example, on a wedding day like this, he truly didn't want to see someone who was neither male nor female appear in front of him.
Even some of his colleagues in the brocade guard, who were true men, had come uninvited.
The only ones who had truly been invited were the court officials. Jining clearly knew this, but he had purposely raised this question to express his dissatisfaction. He also wanted to use this as a pretext to suppress Yang Chendong and have him take control of the conversation. Unexpectedly, Yang Chendong didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. He used the excuse that marrying a wife was a small matter to cover it up. He didn't even say the most basic polite words. This little test made Jining understand that the following negotiations wouldn't be too smooth. At the same time, he became more careful. The conversation changed from probing to straightforward. Marquis of Loyalty and Courage, you must already know about what happened at the morning court today. Someone has recommended you to lead the army against the Walla and raise the prestige of our country. Jining was expressing that he understood his situation.
He had just made a trip to Minister Hu's residence and must have received news of such an important matter.
Now, please state your position. Jining didn't have any intention of beating around the bush. When Yang Chendong heard this, he smiled. This was also good. He didn't have to probe too much and could save a lot of time. All right, since Eunuch Jin's words are so straightforward, then Marquis will also state his position here. It's just a mere Walla army. To be honest, Marquis doesn't really care about them. I won't hide it from Eunuch Jin. Marquis has already contacted the overseas mercenary headquarters. The army they've sent to support our great Ming should be here soon. Chapter 175. What? You've already contacted them in advance? When Jining heard this news, her expression was one of extreme shock. Yes. As the ancients say, if one does not consider the future, one will have immediate worries. After witnessing the ferocity of the Walla cavalry outside the Tumu castle, this Marquis already knew that it would be difficult for our great Ming Empire's army to be their opponent. Thus, he prepared for a rainy day and sent out a signal to send out reinforcements. What? Is Eunuch Jin blaming Marquis for acting on his own? There was a faint smile in Yang Chendong's eyes as he stared at Jining. It was as if he wanted to see through his inner thoughts.
No, how could that be?
For some reason, Jining felt a sense of pressure. He had only felt this kind of pressure not long after entering the palace, when he was serving Zhu Di. It's fine as long as you don't. In truth, it's nothing much. I presume that someone of Eunuch Jin's abilities already knows how much it costs to hire these foreign mercenaries with advanced firearms. It's naturally best if the Imperial court can take out this money. Everything will be fine and the capital will have no more worries. But if there's some difficulty, Marquis can pay for it himself. But if that's the case, they probably won't participate in the operation against the Walla army. After all, it won't cost much to have them protect me and my property from leaving the capital. Marquis can still afford it. But if they go into battle, the cost is truly not something Marquis can afford. Yang Chendong, who had always been so proud of his wealth that he didn't know how to spend it, was now crying about how poor he was. Jining couldn't help but grimace at these words. This was a clear threat. If Daizong was unable to fork out enough money for the military expenditure, Yang Chendong would bring his men and leave the capital. Perhaps he would directly seek refuge with Zhu Qizhen, who was currently settling down in Nanjing. If this was the case, Jining didn't even dare to imagine what sort of chain reaction it would set off. He would not forget that it was precisely because of the opening of the immortal abode and heaven beyond heaven that the hearts of the people were at ease and many officials were willing to stay in the capital. Then, if he left now, would those officials who swayed according to the wind also leave with him? If the people wanted to leave, the officials would have to go with them, and the capital would truly be nothing more than an empty shell. At that time, before Walla's army could even arrive, the capital would have already fallen into chaos. This duke knows about this matter. However, this matter is of great importance. This duke still needs to report back to the emperor to make a decision. Seeing Yang Chendong draw the line, Jining knew that the initiative had changed hands. Unless she didn't want to rely on this person's strength to help, she could only fulfill the conditions to protect herself. After Jining finished speaking, she stood up and looked like she was about to leave. Eunuch Jin, please wait. Marquis hasn't finished speaking yet. The emperor and the imperial court would provide the military necessities, and Marquis would only be a middleman, which would not benefit him in any way. As the saying goes, one should not get up early when one is powerless. Here is one of Marquis' personal conditions. Oh, it's all written on this paper. I'll have to trouble Eunuch Jin to bring it back for His Majesty to see. Marquis will be waiting here for your good news. Yang Chendong was beaming with joy and contentment. At this moment, Yang Chendong was beaming with joy as he handed a piece of white paper filled with words to Jining. He was openly asking the imperial court for benefits from the emperor. How could this be the conduct of a law-abiding official? Normally, Jining would have ridiculed him, and then a large group of embroidered uniform guards and Eastern Depot agents would surround this place and arrest him. But now, he had a favor to ask. Although he was angry, he could only forcefully suppress his dissatisfaction. He even forced a smile and said, "All right, I will report the loyal Marquis' intentions to the emperor." "Don't worry." Jining reached out and took the paper full of words. Then, he strode away. He was really afraid of Yang Chendong. He was afraid that if he left at night, Yang Chendong would say something that would embarrass him. Seeing Jining's back gradually disappear, Tiger's Mane, who had been standing guard beside Yang Chendong in the side hall, took half a step forward and said, "Young master, are we really going to help Daizong? Why don't we take advantage of this opportunity to watch him perish? That way, when we make a move at the last moment, won't we be able to reap the benefits?" Foolish. Yang Chendong, who had been smiling, suddenly had a cold expression. He looked at Tiger's Mane and said, "Have you forgotten what this young master said before? We're all Han people, so how can we protect the interests of the Han people and let them live better? That's what we need to do and consider. As for anything that harms the interests and lives of the common people, we must not do anything, understand?" Yang Chendong was suddenly angry, which gave Tiger's Mane a fright. He immediately half-knelt on the ground and said, "Young master, I was wrong. You are the director of the Security Bureau? When you have nothing to do, you should analyze the situation properly. In the future, there will be many uses for you. If your ability proves that you can't keep up, then it's time for us master and servant to part ways." Yang Chendong sighed softly and said with a tone of disappointment. When he heard that he had to leave Yang Chendong because of this, Tiger's Mane was really frightened. His expression was blank and he said in fear, "Young master, don't worry. Tiger's Mane will definitely study hard and won't make such a mistake again." While Yang Chendong was teaching Tiger's Mane a lesson, in the carriage, Jining had already opened the paper that Yang Chendong handed to her. When she saw the requirements written on it, she punched the window frame of the carriage and said angrily, "Loyal Marquis, you are really pushing your luck. Loyal Marquis, you are going too far." In the palace, after Zhu Qiyu saw the piece of paper sent by Jining, his expression changed unpredictably. In the end, he roared in anger. On the paper, Yang Chendong actually asked to open a bank of the Yang family, a business to deposit money. In other words, he wanted to build a private bank, a bank recognized by the great Ming dynasty. Money and soldiers had always been synonymous with ruling a country. Often, when you had these 2 points,
It was equivalent to having the foundation to establish a new power or even a new country. Yang Chendong's request for Zhu Qizhen to agree to open a bank was equivalent to taking food from a lion's mouth. No wonder he was so angry.
No, I absolutely cannot agree to it.
Zhu Qiyu threw the paper in her hand to the ground, looking angry.
Jining bent down to pick it up and carefully came to Zhu Qiyu's side. Your Majesty, please calm down.
For the sake of your health, don't be so angry.
How can I not be angry? This Yang Chendong clearly wants to loot a burning house.
Does he really think that without him, we won't be able to defeat the Walla?
At worst, I will personally lead the army into battle.
Zhu Qiyu was so angry that he was almost roaring. It was obvious how angry he was at this moment. When Zhu Qiyu mentioned leading the army into battle, Jining somehow thought of Wang Zhen's death in the chaos of the army.
She couldn't help but shiver.
She quickly advised, Your Majesty, you can't. The Walla is coming with ferocious momentum. Our army's morale and strength are lacking.
This is not the right time to fight. Not the right time? Even if I can't defeat them, do you think that Yang Chendong can defeat them? Or do you think he is stronger than me?
Zhu Qiyu was so angry that he lost his head. At this moment, he was so angry that he questioned Jining. Jining's face was filled with fear and trepidation. She knelt on the ground with a thump. Your Majesty, you have a body of gold. You are the true dragon, the son of heaven. Naturally, there is no one more powerful than you in this world. However, that Yang Chendong didn't rely on himself. He hired mercenaries with new firearms with a large sum of money.
Mercenaries?
That's right. Since they can be hired with a large sum of money, why can't we? How about this, my beloved official? You think of a way to contact those mercenaries. We will also pay how much money Yang Chendong is willing to pay. I don't believe that they can't be used by us.
Zhu Qiyu was ruthless.
He decided to throw money at them and compete with their strength. After the great Ming dynasty was ruled by Ran Xuanji, there was a lot of money in the national treasury. If it was a competition of wealth, how could the newly developed Yang Chendong be a match for a country? Seeing that Zhu Qizhen's eyes were almost red from anger, Jining knew that she couldn't refuse this matter. He immediately agreed and then quickly left the palace. He was very suspicious that if he continued to stay, he was afraid that if he was displeased, he would be in big trouble. When faced with an enraged emperor, it was better to stay away from him. The embroidered uniform guards and the Eastern Depot were very efficient. They had long since begun investigating who the leader of the mercenaries was. In addition, Yang Chendong hadn't tried to hide anything. Since this force had already been exposed, they had no intention of withdrawing it. Sooner or later, they would have to announce it to the world. Since that was the case, they might as well do it openly. What harm was there in letting others know? After finding out that the leader of the mercenaries was called Xiao Feng, and that he was a citizen of the great Ming dynasty, Jining brought a few of her trusted subordinates to meet him in an unremarkable restaurant. Ever since the immortal abode appeared in the city, the business of the other restaurants had been greatly reduced. In the past, some of the tycoons rarely patronized the restaurant, and the restaurant was barely hanging on despite the death of its owner. The restaurant they met in was in such a miserable state. She asked to reserve the entire restaurant, and even threw down 10 taels of silver. The owner readily provided the location. By the time Xiao Feng appeared, Jining had already drunk 3 cups of tea. With his current power, there were very few people who could make him wait like this. A trace of impatience appeared on his face. It wasn't until Xiao Feng appeared with 2 of Lung Feng's subordinates that a trace of joy appeared on his face.
Company Commander Xiao, I'm here.
Xiao Feng, who was attracted by the shouts, only casually raised his head to take a glance. He then calmly walked towards the 2nd floor. His footsteps did not have the slightest intention of speeding up because of the other people waiting. All of this was seen by the few embroidered uniform guards who had followed him. Perhaps it was because they were used to being arrogant, but when they saw someone even more arrogant than them, they were naturally unhappy.
Chapter 176. He's an esteemed guest. All of you, behave yourselves. Don't interrupt as you please.
Sensing the changes in her subordinates' emotions, Jin Ying's expression turned cold, causing her subordinates to become much more obedient. Ha ha ha, Commander Xiao, it's an honor to meet you. After reminding her subordinates to behave, Jining saw that Xiao Feng had already reached the second floor and was standing in front of her.
She immediately laughed heartily. Xiao Feng noticed Jinying's enthusiasm, but he didn't show any reaction.
Instead, he nodded and arrogantly sat down on a chair in front of the table.
He crossed his legs and casually scanned the surroundings. This restaurant's decor is too old-fashioned. It's too old-fashioned. What he meant was that the place Jining had chosen to meet him was a little too shabby.
In response, Jining could only smile and say, I originally wanted to invite Commander Xiao to a banquet in the Immortal Abode, but after considering that it's the Loyal Marquis territory, I'm afraid it'll be inconvenient.
What's so inconvenient about it? We're mercenaries. We're only doing this because we took the Loyal Marquis money.
Xiao Feng raised his head, as if he didn't care about Yang Chendong at all. It seemed like Xiao Feng didn't put anyone in his eyes, but when he said these words, his little heart was thumping. He thought in his heart, Young master, you taught me to do all of this.
It's not that I don't respect you. How could Jining know this?
After probing a little, she discovered that Xiao Feng and Yang Chendong were only mercenaries.
She was overjoyed.
As expected, mercenaries only recognized money and not people.
In that case, if others could hire them, wouldn't it be the same if they had money too?
As she rejoiced in this information, Jining leaned forward and asked in a small voice, Then if our emperor is willing to pay money to hire you, would you be willing to work for him?
Why not?
Xiao Feng stared at Jining, as if this was a matter of course and there was no doubt about it.
Jining didn't expect to get the answer so quickly. She was overjoyed and sighed that this task wasn't difficult.
She opened her mouth and said, If that's the case, how much did the Loyal Marquis spend to hire you?
Our emperor is willing to pay the same price. No. I'll give you an extra 10%. Your emperor is willing to invite us? But what are you doing?
Xiao Feng pretended to be interested and asked.
It's nothing.
We just hope that you can defeat the Walla's army that threatens the safety of the capital. Our emperor has also said that once you succeed, he will give you more silver. Jining was afraid that Xiao Feng would be afraid of war, so she purposely emphasized on giving them more money. Tiger's Mane had previously spoken to Xiao Feng on behalf of Yang Chendong about what would happen if he met Jining. He wasn't surprised at all that Jining had said. Thus, when he heard this, he said as they had discussed, Eunuch Jin, I'm very sorry, but this isn't a problem with the money. Jining, who had been prepared to talk incessantly and even wondered if she could get some more money from the commission for her own use, was immediately struck dumb by Xiao Feng's answer.
She didn't understand.
Just now they had said that they could be hired with money, so why couldn't they do it now? Seeing the confusion on Jinying's large face, Xiao Feng shook his head and seriously said, Eunuch Jin presumably knows that I am only a company commander and belong to a branch of the mercenary army. There are officers above me, so I can only report your request to the higher-ups. As for whether they will accept or not, that will depend on the higher-ups.
What?
You mean that your position doesn't allow you to make the decision on this matter? Jining had thought that Xiao Feng was the head of the mercenary army, but to her surprise, he didn't even have the authority to make the decision.
That's right, I truly don't have the authority to make the decision.
Of course, if your emperor is willing, you can report the price first.
I will immediately report the situation. I think it won't take long before we get a reply.
Xiao Feng nodded and said in a businesslike tone. Upon hearing that he still had to report the matter, Jining considered the current situation in the capital and realized that he probably didn't have much time to prepare. Thus, he anxiously asked, Then how long will it take for you to report the matter?
That will depend on luck. If everything goes smoothly, it should be about a month or two.
Xiao Feng pretended to be thinking very seriously, and after thinking for a while, he very cautiously replied. Yang Chendong had naturally thought of this answer so that Jining wouldn't have any other ideas. Reality proved that when Jining heard this answer, he immediately became listless. Only now did he realize that what Xiao Feng had said wasn't a problem with the money, but rather how to interpret it. This was Yang Chendong's method of giving people hope and then giving them disappointment. In order to prevent others from thinking that these mercenaries were directly related to him, he couldn't refuse Jinying's request, but he also couldn't fulfill his wish.
In this way, the delaying technique could be put to good use. Jining left in disappointment, not even offering a price.
He probably also knew that if he waited for Xiao Feng to report the matter, who knew how long he would have to wait. At that time, Whether or not the capital even existed would be up in the air.
Trying to change the situation would be pointless. Upon returning to the Imperial Palace, Jining truthfully reported his meeting with Xiao Feng to Zhu Qiyu. At this time, Zhu Qiyu had already awoken from his rage at Yang Chendong's request, or perhaps it could be said that he was no longer so angry. When he heard Jinying's report, he let out a long sigh and said, "So we can only agree to the loyal Marquis request?" "I'm afraid that's the only thing we can do," Jining weakly replied. The emperor trusted him so much, but if he couldn't even handle such a small matter, he truly felt that he had no face left. "Beloved official, what do you think of this matter? If I agree to the loyal Marquis request and allow him to set up a private bank, what kind of adverse effect will it have on us?" Knowing that there was no other choice, Zhu Qiyu began to face the problem of the Yang clan's bank.
Jining had already begun to consider this matter on the way back from the restaurant.
Since the mercenary route was not feasible, they could only face Yang Chendong. The matter of the bank had to be placed before them. Hearing Zhu Qijuan's question, Jining hesitated for a moment, and then a vicious light flashed through his eyes as he said, "Your Majesty, this might not be a bad thing. You can agree to let him set up a Yang clan bank. As long as Walla retreats, won't your Majesty have the final say in your territory? What if the loyal Marquis is not here one day? Don't you think that the money in the bank will be confiscated? If that's the case? Everything the loyal Marquis is doing now is just making a wedding dress for Zhen." "Beloved official, is this what you mean?" Zhu Qiyu originally had this idea, but he was the emperor. This kind of matter of getting rid of the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness was not good, so as to avoid other people's gossip. However, Jining was completely different. He was just a eunuch. For someone who wasn't complete, it was normal for him to do anything. "Your Majesty is wise." Jining saw that Zhu Qiyu understood what he meant and immediately knelt on the ground and exclaimed, "Haha, good. The problem was solved so easily." Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but be in a good mood. If that's the case, what's the harm in agreeing to his request? Not only that, we should also create momentum for him. How about this? When the Yang family bank is established, the Imperial Palace will also deposit some silver into it. Presumably, with this emperor taking the lead, there will definitely be many people depositing silver, and the amount won't be small, right?
"Yes, your Majesty is wise."
When the Yang clan bank is set up, it will be a fat pig. Once it's fattened up, your Majesty can slaughter it at any time and use it for your own purposes. Jining also chuckled at the side. At this moment, the two officials had malicious smiles on their faces. If Yang Chendong saw this, he would definitely be overjoyed. In the Yang clan manner, Xiao Feng had already rushed back and reported the first sentence he said to Jining from the beginning to the end of their meeting. If Jining was present at this moment, she would definitely be very surprised. Company Commander Xiao Feng, who had said that he didn't care about the loyal Marquis, was now so respectful and careful when he saw Yang Chendong. "You've done well. Go and have a good rest." Yang Chendong, who was very satisfied with Xiao Feng's performance, smiled and watched him leave. He knew that after this meeting, even if Zhu Qiyu didn't agree, he would have to agree. In this way, the Yang clan bank would be recognized by the Imperial family, and its development would be just around the corner. Of course, with Yang Chendong's intelligence, it was impossible that he hadn't thought of Zhu Qiyu's revenge. However, killing him was undoubtedly a fool's dream. He would let the other party be happy for a while. When the Yang clan bank really became strong, it would be too late for regrets. Tiger's Mane, immediately send a message to Gao Xiong in Qiqian City. Have him transport all the gold stored in the city and plundered from the sea to the capital. I have great use for it. Yang Chendong gave the order after some thought. The matter of the Yang clan bank would soon be resolved. In comparison, this was a profitable business. With money, he would have a foundation for development. With money, he could do many things that he wanted to do. At that moment, he hummed a little tune as he walked towards the rear courtyard. There were 4 outstanding beauties waiting for him there, waiting for him to appear. Chapter 177. In the main hall of the Imperial Palace, the officials had gathered early in the morning for a meeting. There was only one topic for this so-called meeting. Who should lead the army to battle Walla? In yesterday's imperial court, Vice Minister Su Yozhen of Taichung Temple had recommended that Marquis of Loyalty Yang Chendong lead the army. Zhu Qiyu had not agreed on the spot and had instead given the officials 1 day. Early this morning, this topic had become the first matter to be resolved. Last night, another report had come from the front lines. Commander and Commander-in-Chief Wuxia Count Shihang had led a defeated army of less than 30,000 retreating toward Datong. There was nothing in front of Walla's army to block their path, and they were able to pass through Juyong Pass and head straight for the capital. This meant that the enemy would arrive at the capital in 7 days at the slowest and 4 at the fastest. If the capital was still unprepared, it would be broken through and everyone would be captured or killed. With the situation so grim, a candidate had to be chosen. Jean Ing announced the news she had received last night in front of all the officials. There were those in the imperial court who were terrified, uneasy, and pale. Civil officials used their mouths while military officials used their sabers. In times of peace, etiquette came first and reason was paramount. This naturally created a situation in which civil officials suppressed military force. But in an emergency situation, reason naturally did not make sense. Trying to reason with the enemy was tantamount to telling a tiger in the mountains to switch to a vegetarian diet. How laughable was that? It was no different from walking into the tiger's den. When they saw that the war was unavoidable, the civil officials naturally shut their mouths. On the contrary, they even revealed expressions of fear. They were completely different people compared to how they were in the past, talking about the past and discussing the present. Who wouldn't be afraid of death? After repeated defeats, Walla's army had placed an enormous pressure on the officials. One could truly say that they paled at the mere mention of it. In this situation, now that there was a candidate to recommend, the officials naturally did not hold back on their praise. Minister of War Yi Ming proposed that Marquis of Loyalty Yang Chendong lead the army. This new minister was truly rather afraid that if there was no suitable candidate, Dai Zong would have him lead the army into battle. If that happened, what difference would it be from sending him to his death? With the Minister of War taking the lead, the other officials naturally agreed. At this moment, they were treating a dead horse as if it were still alive. And it wasn't just the officials. Even Hu Xiao and Hu Chongning, who had opposed the idea yesterday, were now among the officials who supported it. Not only did they support Yang Chendong leading the army, they also requested that he be given great authority. They also said that if the army could not be unified, countless variables could appear on the battlefield. Obviously, when they returned to the Hu estate yesterday, Yang Chendong's words could be considered to have convinced the Hu father and son, which was why they had such a change today. The crowd of courtiers almost unanimously supported Yang Chendong. Sitting high on the dragon throne, Zhu Qiyu knew that the general trend could not be changed. At the imperial court, he ordered people to go forward and pass on the imperial decree for Yang Chendong to attend the imperial court. At this moment, the newly ascended emperor had clearly made up his mind. In the Yang clan manner, Yang Chendong wore a black gauze hat and a turtleneck shirt. There was a python pattern on the chest patch and a belt around his waist. He looked like a third-rank official as he sat in the main hall. Beside him, Hu Yan, Chao Yin, Lady Shui, Lady Xiang, and Yang Duo were pointing and laughing. From time to time, they would cover their mouths with their hands and chuckle. Clearly, this was the first time they had seen the sanctimonious Yang Chendong. Is there something wrong with that? Seeing that the 5 women's eyes were so curious and changing, Yang Chendong finally couldn't help but ask if there was a problem. No, it's very good. I used to see grandfather and father dressed like this when they went to court. I just didn't expect 6th Lang to have such a day, so I'm very curious. Hu Yan covered her mouth and chuckled while shaking her head. She wanted to pretend to be serious, but no matter how she looked at it, she could not hide the smile on her face. There was really nothing wrong with Yang Chendong's clothes. If there was anything to blame, it could only be blamed on his young age. He was not even 20 years old, yet he was dressed so formally. It gave the girls a feeling that he was too dignified and ridiculous. Is there really no problem? Yang Chendong asked with some disbelief. He glanced at the women one by one. Apparently, he did not believe Hu Yan's words just now. There's really no problem. Seeing the disbelief on Yang Chendong's face, 7th sister Yang Duo stood up. It's just because you rarely wear court attire, so everyone is not used to it. Yes, I'm also not used to it. Forget it, I won't wear it. Come, Take it off for the young master. Yang Qindong also felt uncomfortable after wearing these clothes, so he simply decided to stay away from them. As he spoke, he really took off the court attire. Xiao Yin stepped forward to help and asked with doubt, "Sixth Lang, do you really want to take it off?
Didn't you say that the emperor would send an edict to invite you to enter the palace in a while?"
There's nothing wrong with entering the palace, but who stipulated that I have to wear court attire to enter the palace? It's so awkward, so it's better not to wear it. Yang Qindong smiled and shook his head. In his heart he was thinking, I don't have the intention to be an official of the great Ming dynasty, so why do I have to abide by their rules? Besides, if I can't even make this decision and have this little freedom, then I'll be too pitiful. After taking off the court attire and changing into a new set of green clothes, Yang Qindong felt incomparably comfortable. He couldn't help but laugh. That's right. Nothing is more important than being yourself. You should also remember, unless it's an important occasion, you can wear whatever you want. Wear whatever is comfortable. Life is only a few decades, so don't be too hard on yourself. Just as he changed into a new set of green clothes, a eunuch came to pass on a message from outside the Yang family manor, asking the loyal marquis to immediately enter the palace. The emperor and all the civil and military officials were waiting for him. Tiger's Mane had already prepared a healthy horse. Yang Qindong nimbly flipped onto the horse and waved at the women behind him. Then, under the protection of Tiger's Mane and Qiu Vi, the first guard, he went straight to the capital. Hu Yan watched her husband leave. When she couldn't see his shadow anymore, she put on the appearance of a big sister. She turned around to look at Xiao Yin and the other two girls and said, Lu Lang has left. According to his instructions last night, we must immediately take action. Second sister Xiao Yin will stay in the Yang family manor to take care of the overall situation. Third sister Lady Shui and fourth sister Lady Xiang will go to the capital. As long as there are cheap properties and fields, buy them and register them. We'll listen to big sister's instructions. Xiao Yin, Xiao Yuxue, and Dong Hunxiang hurriedly agreed. Yang Duo and her daughter were left behind. Seeing everyone start to get busy, their faces were filled with envy. At this time, her thoughts were also changing. In her eyes, women were no longer just women who knew how to take care of their husbands and children. They could actually do many things. In the Imperial court, the officials had been standing here for a long time. Some of the more impatient officials even looked out of the hall more than once, as if they were waiting for something. Amidst the anticipation of the officials, a eunuch's typical drake-like voice rang out. The loyal marquis requests an audience. He's here, he's here. When the officials heard the shout, they hurriedly straightened their clothes and stood in place. Even Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, subconsciously straightened his dragon robe and looked outside the hall with bright eyes. Amidst everyone's anticipation, the azure-robed Yang Qindong strode into the throne room. The last time he came to the throne room, it was the second day after he entered the capital. He had beaten Wang Go and received the treatment of beating the drum. Compared to before, this time, he was less nervous and uneasy. The imperial court had long ago decreed that when entering the hall to meet the emperor, one had to wear the corresponding official robes. But at this time, Yang Qindong was dressed in azure-robed and entered the imperial court, yet no one said anything. Even the censors, who loved to nitpick, acted as if they did not see him. Subject Yang Qindong pays respects to your majesty. My majesty is. Yang Qindong entered the hall and knelt when he was 10 some steps away from the throne. After allowing Yang Qindong to kneel in front of him, Zhu Qiyu raised his hand and said, All right, loyal marquis, stand up and speak. Thank you, your majesty. Even though he did not like kneeling in front of the officials in the imperial court, there was some etiquette that could not be discarded. After answering, Yang Qindong slowly stood up. When he stood up, he stood there like a javelin, giving off the feeling that no matter what wind blew, he would not move. Standing among the officials was Hu Zhongning. He had been practicing martial arts since he was a child and had some skill. At this moment, when he saw Yang Qindong's performance, he could not help but have a thought in his mind. His son-in-law seemed to be a martial artist, and his strength should not be weak. But why did he not notice it before? Yang Qindong stood where he was. Zhu Qiyu, who did not understand martial arts, naturally could not see Yang Qindong's true strength. His intuition told him that the loyal marquis was standing there with great vigor. Loyal Marquis, we have summoned you to this hall to discuss matters. I presume that you also know what is going on? Walla's army is threatening the capital, and the officials have recommended you to lead the army. We also believe in Loyal Marquis, but are you willing to do your duty for the country? Even though he had already sent Jining to privately discuss this matter with Yang Chendong, he still had to do his duty. At this moment, he still had to go through the proper procedures. This subject is willing to do his duty for the country, share His Majesty's burden, and do his best for the peace and prosperity of the Great Ming. Anyone could say beautiful words, and at this moment, Yang Chendong had put on a perfect display of the relationship between ruler and subject. Good. Zhu Qiyu was elated to see Yang Chendong so readily agree.
Loyal Marquis, hear this. You are made General of Swift Cavalry, primary second rank, and left Commander-in-Chief of the 5 armies of the capital. You are in charge of the large and small armies of the capital, and you are in charge of all the soldiers in the city.
Since he was going to be put in an important position, and at this critical moment, a promotion was only natural. As for controlling all the soldiers in the city, this was naturally because of the urgency of the situation, and he had no choice but to give Zhu Qiyu this important authority. Zhu Qiyu was keenly aware that this was a battle of life and death, so he naturally could not be careless. Chapter 178. This subject accepts the decree and thanks for your Majesty's grace. Yang Chendong knelt and bowed. Zhu Qiyu had only accepted the decree and didn't make any promises. He knew that it wasn't enough to just give Yang Chendong military authority, and it was time to state the conditions that they had agreed on. Otherwise, if he didn't put in any effort, it would be equally dangerous. His gaze first swept across the officials before landing on Yang Chendong. This time, the Walla has invaded the borders and is heading straight for the capital, causing the capital to be in danger. I heard that the price of grain has skyrocketed, and the value of gold and silver has shrunk, causing the commoners to panic. With this in mind, we believe that this isn't only due to Ing Zongxin's defeat, but also due to the merchants taking advantage of the situation. Thus, we have decided to open a private bank among the commoners. Loyal and courageous Marquis, we wish to hand over this responsibility to you and request that you stabilize the price of goods in the capital in the shortest time possible. Are you able to do so? He first talked about the situation in the capital, and he didn't forget to mention the matter of Ing Zongxin's defeat. Then, he threw out the idea of establishing a private bank and asked for Yang Chendong's opinion. These scenes made the officials feel overwhelmed. Only Yang Chendong had an indifferent look on his face. He had long expected such a result. This was originally a matter that had been discussed. Just as Zhu Qiyu thought, if he was only given military authority and no other benefits, he might still defend the capital, but that was it. However, if he obtained enough benefits, he would be able to fight this battle beautifully. After kneeling and bowing 3 times, Yang Chendong finally revealed some gratitude. This subject is willing to establish a private bank and contribute to the economic development of the Great Ming dynasty and the stability of the country. At the same time, this subject intends to change the name of the private bank to the Yang Family Bank. At that time, this subject will pay 2 million taels of silver to the national treasury every year as business tax. I ask for your Majesty's permission. Hiss. A series of gasps could be heard in the hall. As for the matter of establishing a bank and changing its name to the Yang Family Bank, many people still didn't understand what was going on. However, there was one sentence that was very clear. That was, if a bank was willing to hand over 2 million taels of silver to the national treasury, that was equivalent to half of the annual agricultural tax. What kind of figure was this? It was also money that many officials could not earn in their lifetime or even several lifetimes. However, it was easily promised by Yang Chendong. How could people not be shocked when they heard it? For real. Emperor Zhu Qiyu was the most surprised. If you don't manage the household, you don't know the cost of firewood and rice. These words were also applicable to the emperor. Originally, Zhu Qiyu only wanted to be a Yu Wang. She only saw the emperor's awe-inspiring appearance and how everyone responded to his call. However, after becoming the emperor, he realized that money was the most important thing in a country. Money was needed for a natural disaster. Building irrigation works required money. Building a city required money. More money was needed to raise officials and soldiers. In short, if one wanted to be a wise emperor,
a wise emperor who was praised by everyone, then he needed to use countless amounts of money to solve everything and strive to satisfy more people.
This was the emperor's task. Although Ran Xian's rule was first and the national treasury was abundant, a lot of money was used in the Battle of the Tumu Castle. After the defeat, it was unknown how much money was needed to compensate the soldiers. Moreover, there were two emperors ruling at the same time. The income of a country was divided into two parts. As a result, it was foreseeable that in the future, there would be more income and less expenditure. Moreover, if he wanted to become a truly famous ruler, the task of unifying the entire country was a must. It was very likely that he would have to fight with Zhu Qizhen. If he wanted to fight a war, who knew how much money he would need? As a result, how to generate income became the focus of the work in the future. At this time, Yang Qindong stood up and said that he would set up a Yang family bank and would be able to send 2 million taels of tax every year. How could this not make Zhu Qiu's heart blossom with joy? A Yang family bank could pay 2 million taels a year. If there were 10 such banks, then wouldn't the problem of expenditure be solved? Wouldn't they be able to deposit more taels into the national treasury? In his joy, he couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Cough, cough. Jean Ing, who was standing at the side, coughed softly. She used this method to remind Zhu Qiu of his loss of composure in front of the palace. At this moment, the emperor also reacted. He quickly made up for it. Good, very good. Since the loyal marquis is so confident, we will deposit 500,000 taels first.
Depositing 500,000 taels of silver was nothing to an emperor.
This was just Zhu Qiu's way of expressing his support for this matter. Many thanks, Your Majesty, for being the first customer of the Yang family bank to deposit money. This subject will give you a monthly interest of 0.45%. That is, 500,000 taels of silver. The monthly interest is 2,250 taels of silver. Yang Qindong quickly thought and gave an answer. With a monthly interest of 0.45%, that was 100 taels of silver. The monthly interest would be 450 taels of silver. 1,000 taels of silver would be 450 taels of silver. 10,000 taels of silver would be 45 taels of silver. This kind of interest was still very high. At least, it was higher than the current interest of a modern bank.
This naturally became a great temptation, causing the eyes of the other ministers to light up when they heard the result.
500,000 taels of silver. The monthly interest would be 2,000 taels of silver. That was enough money for many large families to spend for 2 to 3 months or even longer.
Although there were very few people who had so much savings, they should have at least 50,000 taels of silver.
This way, the monthly interest of the Yang family bank would be 200 taels of silver. No matter how one looked at it, it was appropriate. Not only were the officials shocked by this result, even Zhu Qiu was shocked by Yang Qindong's words.
Loyal Marquis, do you know that the words of the emperor are not joking?
This subject naturally knows. Your Majesty only needs to prepare the silver. Once we win this battle to protect the capital, the Yang family bank will quickly be established. At that time, Your Majesty only needs to send people to deliver the silver and then collect the monthly interest. Yang Qindong said with confidence. Although the interest of this deposit was not low, it was nothing compared to the interest he set for the loan. As a modern person, he naturally knew that money only had an important use in circulation. If everyone saved their silver and did not use it to stimulate consumption, the progress of society would be much slower. Zhu Qiu naturally believed Yang Qindong's words. In front of the officials he said, "Good, then we will wait for the opening of the Yang family bank."
Ha ha ha.
With Zhu Qiu's laughter, the court session came to a successful conclusion. However, when the officials walked out of the hall, not many of them revealed relaxed expressions. First, they still doubted whether Yang Qindong, who was not even 20 years old, really had the ability to protect the capital. Second, was opening that bank really that profitable? If so, should they deposit their money in it? The officials all had their own thoughts. Yang Qindong did not leave with the officials. Instead, after watching Emperor Zhu Qiu leave, he was called to the side by Jean Ing to discuss the details of the next step. Jean Ing was resting in a courtyard within the palace. In a pavilion built on water, the two of them sat facing each other. Loyal Marquis, have a taste of this Duke's tea leaves. Jean Ing was all smiles.
The defense of the capital would depend on this person, so this was naturally not the time to be giving him the cold shoulder. On the contrary, he was waiting for Yang Chendong to state his conditions, the treatment of the mercenaries.
Both Zhu Qiyu and Jin Ying were keenly aware of this. They had placed Yang Chendong in command not because of his military talent, but because he could directly order the mercenaries with the new firearms. Even Yang Chendong himself knew that relying on the 10,000-some soldiers in the capital was simply not enough. In the end, he still had to rely on the new soldiers he had trained. Since this was the case, he naturally had to obtain enough benefits. Otherwise, this opportunity to demand an exorbitant price would be hard to come by again. The tea leaves are pretty good. It seems that eunuch Jean has some good stuff, Yang Chendong said with a dazzling smile, seemingly very satisfied with Jin Ying's hospitality. Since this was a negotiation, a relatively harmonious atmosphere was naturally of utmost importance. It was not a life-and-death battle between two enemies. It was just a matter of money. This required excellent patience and a good atmosphere. Ha ha ha, loyal Marquis, you praise me too much. This duke is simply being rewarded by His Majesty. Jin Ying threw his head back and heartily laughed, his good mood written all over his face. How could he not know that this was an opportunity for Yang Chendong to ask for benefits, as well as an opportunity for him to obtain benefits? Although the two of them were very different in age, they both had the heart of a fox. Using a large fox and a small fox to make up the situation was not excessive at all. As expected, His Majesty's rewards are always the best, Yang Chendong said with some emotion. Then he brought up the main topic. But I wonder what kind of reward His Majesty will give for using the mercenaries this time? Finally they talked about the main topic. At this moment, Jin Ying's expression became much more serious. But I wonder how many mercenaries loyal Marquis has invited this time, and what are their chances of defeating Walla's army? It seemed that Jin Ying was much more mature than Yang Chendong, as if he had always held the initiative. Yang Chendong did not care about this. With the mercenaries in hand, the initiative was in his hands. As for who made the first request, in his opinion, it did not matter. This was not an equal negotiation and transaction to begin with. Haha, how much chance of victory there is, how many mercenaries can be invited to help, all depends on how determined His Majesty is. Yang Chendong picked up the teacup and took a sip. At the same time, he spoke with confidence. Chapter 179. Oh. Based on what you're saying, if the Emperor's reward is enough, we can definitely win this battle? Jin Ying was not very interested in Yang Chendong's boasting. He was just a young boy who was not even 20 years old. He had only been on the battlefield once and relied on his so-called advanced firearms to save Zhu Qizhen. Did he really think that he could treat all the heroes of the world as if they were nothing? Could he really treat the Tile army as if they were invisible? Wasn't he being too arrogant? Jin Ying wanted to strike a blow at Yang Chendong and weaken his momentum. Then, during the negotiations, he would have more power to take the initiative and naturally be able to obtain more benefits. Yes. Marquis has absolute confidence, Yang Chendong replied confidently. There was still a calm smile on his face. How could he not see Jin Ying's intentions? How could he not know that war was ever changing? Logically speaking, even if you had great power, you could not speak too confidently. But this time, he was going to do the opposite. He had absolute confidence that he could win this battle. All of this came from his confidence in the firearms in the warehouse and his absolute trust in the cold front. He was about to bring the tea to his mouth and see how Yang Chendong would answer his question. As long as he said something that lacked confidence, that would be the time for Jin Ying to press the issue. Then when the time came, he would be able to lower his demands to the minimum. Then, he would be able to make a contribution in front of Zhu Qiyu and think of a way to obtain more benefits for himself. However, before he could drink the tea, Yang Chendong had already given him an answer. It was an answer that was certain and confident. He said that he had absolute confidence in defeating the Walla's army. This answer was completely out of Jin Ying's expectations. After a moment of shock, a cautious light flashed through his eyes. He said, "Marquis, war is not a game. You can't just talk about it casually. You have to see blood and kill." Haha, of course Marquis knows this. When Marquis saved Ying Zong and the 9 important officials at Tumu Castle, he also saw blood. Who knows how many of the Walla army died at Marquis' hands? Of course, I know this very well. In response to Jin Ying's question, Yang Chendong responded with a smile. He looked very casual and confident. Marquis, are you that confident? This time, you're not trying to break out of the encirclement while the Walla's army is not paying attention. Instead, you're trying to stop the enemy outside the country?
Then, you might be facing a large group of the enemy's army?
Jin Ying's tone of voice was still somewhat skeptical. When the Tumu castle was defeated, it was true that Yang Chendong had saved Yingzong and the 9 important officials.
But at the time, he had chosen to go in the opposite direction of the enemy.
He had not taken the shortest path back to the capital, but had instead circled around to the enemy's empty rear. Jin Ying had long ago had the embroidered uniform guard investigate this matter.
It was precisely for this reason that he believed that while the strength of the mercenaries was impressive, they could only fight on a small scale.
In a real battle, these so-called new firearms would not be of much use. Based on what he understood, Jin Ying did not believe that the mercenaries were omnipotent and invincible. But what he did not know was that the reason he had chosen to go to the enemy's rear rather than to protect Yingzong was because Yang Chendong had intended to do so. He had done this in order to prepare for the simultaneous reign of 2 emperors and give Zhu Qiyu enough time to ascend the throne. Otherwise, if he had really taken the shortest path to the capital with the Lung Feng army, how could there have been the matter of Zhu Qiyu ascending the throne? Of course, Yang Chendong wouldn't explain this to anyone. Otherwise, everyone would know what Sima Zhao's intentions were. It was precisely because he could not explain this matter to anyone that Jin Ying had misunderstood.
He thought that the mercenaries were only slightly stronger than ordinary soldiers and were not truly invincible.
Since he had questions, he naturally had to answer them. In response, Yang Chendong smiled and said, Marquis said that we can defeat the Walla army, so we can naturally do it. Of course, this all depends on how much silver His Majesty can give us. As the saying goes, before the troops and horses move, the provisions move first. I'm sure eunuch Jin understands this principle. This is only natural. Jin Ying nodded.
Seeing Yang Chendong so confident and giving such an absolute answer when asked about the outcome of the war, the great eunuch was very curious as to how much this person wanted.
Since the loyal Marquis is so confident, this is naturally a great thing. Presumably, when we really win the battle, the Emperor and the common people will definitely be grateful to the loyal Marquis. However, I wonder how much money it will cost?
There's no need to say thanks.
As a subject of the great Ming dynasty, one of Marquis' responsibilities is to defend the country from the enemy. At the very least, the amount of silver is not what Marquis wants. It's just that the strength of the mercenaries is too great. The price to pay for their help is very high. Yang Chendong looked as if he wanted to explain in detail, but he was interrupted by Jin Ying. All right, we are all understanding people and smart people. There's no need to go into so much detail. You only need to tell me the amount of silver you need.
When the time comes, I will naturally report it to His Majesty.
Jin Ying interrupted Jin Ying. This was her way of expressing her reluctance. At the same time, it was also a signal that everyone was understanding people. There was no need to beat around the bush. It was better to directly state the amount of benefits needed in order to be willing to work. Jin Ying felt that she had seen through the loyal Marquis. Yang Chendong did not explain this. There were many things that had to be told in the end. Before that, everything would be in vain. He only chuckled and said, Eunuch Jin is a straightforward person. Since that's the case, Marquis will not be pretentious. How about this? We need this amount to win this battle. As he spoke, Yang Chendong extended his right index finger. 1 million. Jin Ying chuckled. She had thought that Yang Chendong would ask for an exorbitant amount. However, when she saw that he had only extended a single finger, she immediately laughed. Young people were young. Their appetite was small and their determination was lacking. He had exposed his bottom line so quickly, and it was only 1 million taels of silver. Chuckling, Jin Ying once again brought the tea to her mouth.
The corners of her mouth curled up into a mocking smile.
Yang Chendong also chuckled. He was in no hurry to explain. When he saw Jin Ying pour the tea into her mouth, he suddenly said, I think eunuch Jin has misunderstood. It's not 1 million but 10 million. As expected, she spat out a mouthful of tea. Seated across from her, Yang Chendong was prepared. He casually tilted his body, allowing the tea to fly past him without splashing on his body. Jining did not care about this sudden loss of composure. He didn't even ask if the tea had landed on Yang Chendong. Instead, he glared at the person in front of him. After around 4 or 5 breaths, he clenched his teeth and squeezed out each word. Loyal Marquis, this is not the way to ask for benefits. Even if the capital is somewhat dangerous, this is not the time to ask for an exorbitant amount. Although she warned Yang Chendong, she was inwardly cursing his greed. 10 million taels of silver? Did she think that silver could fall from the heavens?
If there really was 10 million taels of silver, who knew how many soldiers could be trained and how many elite divisions could be created?
No, no, no. Yang Chendong raised his right index finger and shook his head. This isn't asking for an exorbitant amount. This is just how much the war needs. If it can't be satisfied, then it's fine. Marquis won't lead the army.
Yang Chendong leaned back in his chair, his relaxed expression seeming to say that he had not asked for this matter.
Someone else had asked him to do it, and he was only reluctantly doing it. Yang Chendong had an indifferent look on his face, as if he had no interest in this so-called military authority. As a result, Jining felt as if she had punched cotton.
Having Yang Chendong lead the army was a matter that had been decided in the Imperial court, and it could not be easily changed.
Not to mention, apart from Yang Chendong, there were no other suitable candidates at the moment.
If they randomly sent someone and lost the war in the end, the consequences would not be acceptable to everyone.
Jining expression changed again and again.
She took 2 quick breaths and suppressed the anger in her heart.
She opened her mouth and said, Loyal Marquis, even if you say that before the troops and horses are mobilized, the provisions will come first, but isn't 10 million a little too much? Not at all, not at all. Seeing that Jining was beginning to take his request seriously, Yang Chendong had a carefree smile on his face as he said, Eunuch Jin probably doesn't know, but for the sake of victory, I invited 300 more mercenaries. Together with the 100 left in the capital, that's a total of 400. Is this correct? That's how the bill is calculated, but there's no need for 10 million taels of silver. Jining was naturally overjoyed to hear that another 300 elite mercenaries had come, but she was still a little conflicted about 10 million taels of silver. Yang Chendong didn't mind and continued to calculate. 400 mercenaries. Normally, each of them would cost 10,000 taels of silver. I trust that Eunuch Jin has heard of this before. Correct. Although 10,000 taels of silver per person is a high price, if they truly do have exceptional fighting strength, it's still barely acceptable. But even so, it's only 4 million taels of silver. Where did 10 million come from? Jining anxiously retorted. Eunuch Jin, there's no need to be in such a rush. Wait until Marquis has finished calculating the bill before you speak, all right? A hint of displeasure appeared on Yang Chendong's face. Presumably, anyone who was constantly interrupted would be unhappy. Chapter 180. All right. Forget about the loyal Marquis for now. I will listen. Jining was very good at reading people's expressions. Otherwise, he would not have been placed in such an important position by Zhu Qiyu. He naturally noticed Yang Chendong's displeasure.
In order to prevent the situation from becoming tense, he could only obediently shut his mouth.
Jining did not interrupt. Yang Chendong's expression became better. He continued, Normally, it is true that hiring a mercenary soldier for a mission costs 10,000 taels of silver per person. However, the same mission should not be of different levels. For example, some missions are simple and easy to complete. Of course, this price is acceptable. However, this time, we are fighting with fewer people. If we use the previous price to calculate, it will not work. I won't hide it from Eunuch Jin.
Marquis had already seen the urgency of the situation. Thus, he had already discussed with the leader of the mercenary soldiers. He asked for their help at a price of 20,000 taels of silver per person.
Only then did he convince them. Based on this calculation, 400 people would be 8 million taels of silver. Adding on the military expenses and food for the 10,000 soldiers of the city defense army, it would be at least 1 million taels of silver. In the end, the remaining 1 million taels of silver is for Eunuch Jin's hard work. I believe Eunuch Jin will not refuse. Based on this calculation, Marquis is the one who is doing the work but not getting anything out of it. Sigh. Finally, he finished speaking. However, after he finished speaking, Yang Chendong purposely acted as if he had been greatly wronged.
It was as if he had done all this for nothing. Sitting there and listening, when he heard that the cost of hiring 400 elite soldiers was 8 million taels of silver, his eyes widened.
His face was filled with disbelief. It was no wonder he was so surprised. With 8 million taels of silver, he would be able to find a way to scrape together millions of soldiers. However, there were only 400 soldiers going to battle. This ratio was too great. However, when Yang Chendong finished speaking and said that he had left him 1,000,000 taels of silver, Jin Ying's expression became much better. She sighed inwardly at Yang Chendong's sensibility. No wonder this person could become good friends with Wang Zhen.
This kind of consideration for his friends was very likable. However, when he thought about it from another perspective, 10 million gold coins was a large expenditure. When he reported it to Zhu Qiyu, there was a chance that he would be rejected. Thus, he said with a bitter expression, "Loyalty Marquis, this duke appreciates your good intentions.
However, 10 million gold coins is truly too much. See if you can reduce it by half. This duke's share can also be reduced by half." Jin Ying endured the pain as she thought about how she had gained both the benefits and Zhu Qiyu's favor. In this way, her benefits would be reduced by a total of 500,000 taels. With this money, he could have more people become his trusted aides. This was an extremely good thing for increasing his strength. She really wanted to be a whore but also wanted to set up a memorial archway. Yang Chendong despised Jin Ying in his heart, but he spoke with certainty. My 9 million is not one tael less. Of course, if eunuch Jin wants to be more spirited, then 9,500,000 taels will do. Clearly, the 500,000 taels that Yang Chendong asked for were the 500,000 taels that were given to Jin Ying. The amount didn't change. The only thing that changed was her share of the benefits. How could Jin Ying be willing to accept this?
She shook her head and said, "How can this be?
Since it's like this, then 10 million taels will do."
Just as she finished speaking, Jin Ying continued with a worried expression. "But Loyalty Marquis, I'm afraid that His Majesty won't agree to such a large sum of money at once. Also, I'm afraid that the Ministry of Revenue won't be able to gather so much money in such a short time." Seeing that Jin Ying had accepted this reality, the corners of Yang Chendong's mouth curled up into a smile. Eunuch Jin doesn't need to worry about this. Marquis has already thought of a solution for His Majesty.
The National Treasury won't be able to take out so much money in such a short time. It's fine to say this to others, but I'm sure that Eunuch Jin and Marquis both know this. But to take out 10 million taels of silver at once, I'm sure that even His Majesty's heart will ache. If that's the case, the National Treasury can take out an advance of 5 million taels of silver. I'm sure that this amount should be enough to convince His Majesty.
Jin Ying was naturally overjoyed to hear this.
That's right.
If it's only 5 million taels of silver, it will naturally be much easier to convince His Majesty.
But this way, how can we convince the mercenaries? Do we have to give them the money in installments?
Of course not.
How could the money used for war be given in installments? That would create a major problem. Yang Chendong shook his head. If it can't be given in installments, then what about the remaining 5 million taels of silver? Jin Ying was somewhat confused by Yang Chendong's words. Don't worry, Eunuch Jin. Marquis thinks like this. Aren't there still many properties belonging to the imperial household in the capital? For example, the deeds to many houses and residences belong to His Majesty, so it's better to sell them to Marquis at a discount. Think about it, if the capital really can't be protected, these things can't be taken away just because His Majesty says so. It's better to sell them to Marquis at a discount and use them as the 5 million taels of silver. As for Marquis, he'll naturally find a way to gather the 5 million taels for war. Eunuch Jin will also need to make a trip to the newly appointed Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian. At the very least, no one will be lacking in benefits. Chuckling, Yang Chendong set his sights on the best houses in the capital. This was one of the goals of his trip. It was said that the antiques of prosperous times were the gold of troubled times. In truth, houses were also extremely cheap items in troubled times. At crucial times, everyone would be thinking about saving their lives. So who would buy a house? At that time, Even if it was given away for free, no one would dare to stay. Yang Qindong understood this principle, so how could Jining not? With the Walla's army approaching the capital, the people were panicking, and house prices were plummeting by the day. Even so, there were still more people selling than buying. One could say that houses were the most worthless thing in the world. And if she could convert this worthless thing into money and give it to Yang Qindong, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? With these houses, Yang Qindong would probably have to do everything he could to protect the capital. This seemed like a perfect solution, and it would be much easier to use this as an excuse to persuade Zhu Qiyu. Not to mention, he would be able to earn some money from buying and selling the houses. As for the Bureau of Revenue, given his status, who would dare to stop him if he wanted to do something? When she thought about how she could get this job done and still make a profit, Jin Ying's complexion visibly improved. Good, good. The loyal Marquis's intentions are good. Since this is the case, this association will immediately report to His Majesty. I presume that this matter won't be too difficult to handle. Jin Ying regained her confident expression. It was as if everything had returned to her control. After negotiating the terms, Jin Ying wanted to see the Emperor, Zhu Qiyu. Her eyes were filled with eagerness. In response, Yang Qindong showed no intention of rising. Instead, he raised his teacup and leisurely said, "Eunuch Jin, there is one more matter that I don't know if you know. Marquis has suddenly been suspended from his post in the embroidered uniform guard. Now that I mention it, this was a post that His Majesty personally conferred upon him. For what reason?" Jin Ying had been thinking about how to report this matter to Zhu Qiyu when she heard Yang Qindong's words, and her face instantly paled. There was such a thing? This eunuch was unaware. Oh, then it must have been a subordinate acting on his own initiative. Haha, speaking of which, it's just a post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. Marquis doesn't care much about it. However, now that the entire nation is focused on fighting against foreign enemies, if people find out that Marquis has been suspended from his post, it's inevitable that some people will let their imaginations run wild and think that Marquis has done something wrong to incur the Emperor's wrath. If that's the case, it's extremely disadvantageous for Marquis to lead troops into battle. Yang Qindong spoke with a faint smile, but it was clear that there was still a trace of anger in his eyes. He was clearly a little angry. Jin Ying was indeed unaware of this matter. Although the commander of the embroidered uniform guard was his trusted aide, LV Gue, he didn't report everything to him. His main duty was to stay by His Majesty's side. Only when something major happened would he report to him. Therefore, when he first heard Yang Qindong say that he had been suspended from his post, he was stunned. When he heard the consequences of this, he felt that the matter was a little serious. At this moment, Yang Qindong's authority was not to be questioned. Otherwise, how could he lead troops into battle? How could he carry out orders and prohibitions? Marquis of Loyalty, I really don't know about this matter. Your post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard was indeed conferred by His Majesty. Even if something happens, it should be up to His Majesty to decide. This time, LV Gue and the others have overstepped their boundaries. I ask that Marquis of Loyalty not take issue with them. Now, I can announce that your post as the commander of the embroidered uniform guard has been reinstated. After this, I will find LV Gue and have him apologize to you. Jin Ying, who knew the importance of this matter, immediately expressed his opinion and placed Yang Qindong in an important position. All right, then I'll have to trouble eunuch Jin. Since that's the case, Marquis will go to patrol the city and meet with the generals. All right, I'll have to trouble eunuch Jin to hurry up with the matter of the silver. Walla's army will soon arrive at the city. If they aren't in place by then, Marquis can't guarantee that the soldiers will fight with their lives. As for the matters at the Ministry of Revenue, I'll arrange for my cousin Yang Fu to go there. If there's anything, you can discuss it. Yang Qindong finally stood up. He had said what he needed to say and done what he needed to do. It was time to prepare for the war. Good, good. Don't worry, Marquis of Loyalty. I'll go see His Majesty now. The silver will be quickly sent over. All right, I'll have to trouble eunuch Jin. All right, LV Gue should be eunuch Jin's man. Since that's the case, when the silver arrives, ask him to find Marquis to get your 1,000,000 taels. Yang Qindong chuckled, then cupped his fists and bowed before leaving the palace. Chapter 181. Yang Qindong had specifically asked Lu Guei to come and get the silver. It was clear that he wanted to make things difficult for Lu Guei and take revenge for his previous suspension. How could Jining not see that? She just thought that since Lu Guei had been wronged, then he had to pay the price for his mistake. It was just lowering his head and admitting his mistake. Presumably, Lu Guei did not have the guts to not listen to her and not lower his head. After Yang Qindong left, Jining went to the palace where Zhu Qiyu was resting. She picked out some things that could be said about what had just been discussed. When Jining said that Yang Qindong needed 10 million taels of silver to guarantee victory, Zhu Qiyu was shocked. What? Does fighting a battle require so much silver? It was no wonder that Zhu Qiyu was so surprised. Ever since he had taken the throne, he had never experienced this. Previously, when Shi Hang had left the city to fight, he had been in too much of a hurry. He had only asked the Ministry of Revenue to replenish some provisions before leaving. At that time, Zhu Qiyu was still trying to stabilize his position and did not think too much about it. Now, when he heard that fighting a battle required so much silver, he was naturally surprised and even shocked. He continued to listen. When he heard that he only needed to pay 5 million taels of silver and the rest could be offset by real estate in the capital, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, he still had a stomach full of doubts. My dear subject, does fighting a battle require so much silver? Although Jining was very trusted by Zhu Qiyu and held great power, she also knew that the emperor's inquiry could not be concealed. Otherwise, once she lost the emperor's favor, she would lose everything. Your Majesty, normally we don't need so much money to fight a war, but this time we used the loyal Marquis. He also invited the mercenaries with advanced firearms to help. More than 80% of the money is for them to use. According to what the loyal Marquis said, the ammunition for that kind of firearm is very expensive. Moreover, with our great Ming's technology, it is impossible to make it. That is why the price is so high. I see. After listening, Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but sigh and say, my great Ming dynasty has a vast territory and abundant resources. Why can't we make an advanced firearm? After this battle, we have to urge the weapons workshop to hurry up and develop them. Your Majesty is wise. This subject will remember this matter. However, do you think we should agree to the request of the loyal Marquis? The situation is perilous, and the Tile army can arrive at any time. If we don't settle down and miss this chance, the capital will be in danger, Jining anxiously asked Zhu Qiyu, still thinking about the benefits that belonged to her. Promise him. As long as we can protect the capital and repel the Walla, all he needs is some money and property. What's wrong with giving it to him? Just as my beloved official said, this is my country, my world. Everything here belongs to me. Naturally, I can take back what I have given away at any time. Zhu Qiyu stood there with his back straight and his eyes looking into the distance. At this moment, he exuded the aura of an emperor. When these words reached Jinying's ears, he couldn't help but kneel on the ground in submission. Your Majesty is wise. This subject will do as you say. Jining left. After receiving Zhu Qiyu's decree, the Ministry of Revenue quickly took out 5 million taels of silver and sent it to Yang Qindong's immortal abode. Yang Fu was also invited to the Ministry of Revenue to discuss the matter of property. Although Yang Fu was Yang Qindong's older cousin, he had long been impressed by his younger cousin's methods in Jianghu Prefecture. Later on, because of his outstanding performance, he had been assigned to manage the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode, wielding great authority. Now that Yang Qindong had arranged for him to go to the Ministry of Revenue to discuss matters, how could he dare to be negligent? After meeting with his younger cousin and understanding Yang Qindong's intentions, he set out. With the money and provisions gradually arriving, the commander-in-chief, Yang Qindong, began to get busy. The first thing he did was summon the commanders of the central, eastern, western, southern and northern cities, the 5 commanders of the 5 armies, to the immortal abode for a meeting. Yang Qindong had been made general of swift cavalry and left commander of the 5 armies of the capital. He was in charge of all military affairs in the capital, large and small. The order to control all the soldiers in the city had been passed down long ago, and the 5 commanders were all waiting for Yang Qindong to summon them. When the order arrived, the 5 commanders were escorted by a few personal guards to a private room on the 2nd floor of the immortal abode. As commanders of the 5 cities' military office, they were also called commanders. Their positions were not very high,
only at the 6th rank, and they were considered military officials. In an environment where the emphasis was placed on literature and the suppression of military might, generals were not valued, and they were even inferior to some of the 7th-rank civil officials. In a place like the Immortal Abode, they rarely visited. Their positions were low, and their incomes were low. Even when they occasionally visited, they would only be looking for a seat in the main hall. They rarely even visited the private rooms on the 1st floor, much less the private rooms on the 2nd floor. Only platinum card members were allowed to enter, and these were people who were either extremely wealthy or extremely noble. This time, they had been summoned by Yang Chendong to enjoy such treatment. When they reached the 2nd floor, they were extremely cautious. Even when they saw the azure-robed Yang Chendong in the private room, they were still very cautious. "You're all here. Take a seat." He looked at the 5 commanders of the 5 armies. They were Tao Jin, Yang Jie, Gao Li, Mao Fushou, and Sun Tong. As generals in charge of defending the capital, there was a limit to what they could do. No one could have imagined that someone would come knocking on their door, so these 5 were not skilled fighters. On the contrary, they had only obtained their current positions because of the influence of their ancestors. But because Ying Zong and Shi Hang had suffered consecutive defeats, the capital had become dangerous, and their positions had become extremely important. It was precisely because their positions were so important that the 5 of them began to think of ways to leave their current positions. Perhaps it was because they were cowards, or perhaps it was because they knew their own weight, but there was no way they could win in this kind of war. This forced them to find other methods. It was as if among the 4 of them, apart from Sun Tong, the other 4 had all found some connections. It was just that time was short, and this was a position that no one could avoid, so Tao Jin and the others had not been able to find a suitable replacement. The situation had already been thoroughly investigated by the Security Bureau, and Yang Chendong was naturally very clear about it. And this time, he called the 5 of them over. To put it bluntly, he wanted to reorganize the internal affairs. He would definitely not allow unstable factors and situations to appear in the midst of a war. The 5 of them stood in front of Yang Chendong with apprehension. When they heard that they could sit down, the 5 of them cupped their fists and said respectfully, "Thank you, Marquis." Seeing that the 5 of them had found a place to sit down, Yang Chendong waved his hand and said to Tiger's Mane, who was waiting at the door, "Pass down the order. Don't serve the dishes yet, and there's no need for anyone to serve here. Everything will be discussed after Marquis has finished discussing matters." "Yes," Tiger's Mane replied, then closed the door of the private room and waited there. At the same time, his ears perked up to ensure that if anything happened in the room, he could immediately rush in to protect the young master's safety. The room was closed, and there was no one else in the room. There wasn't even a cup of tea to quench their thirst. For a moment, the 5 of them felt waves of nervousness, and the more cowardly ones began to break out in cold sweat. Yang Chendong saw the 5 of them's expressions, and for the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he did not say a word. It was this overly quiet scene that caused the 5 commanders' mentality to undergo a huge change. They were not sure what their boss's temper was like. What would he do next? The room was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Just when the commanders were so nervous that they did not dare to wipe off the cold sweat on their heads, Yang Chendong, who was sitting at the head of the table, spoke. "The 5 of you, Walla's army will invade the capital in a few days. Do you have the courage to fight?" "Yes." After being stunned for a moment, the 5 of them replied in unison. There were only 5 of them, and their voices were not in unison. Some were loud, some were soft, some were strong and some were weak. This was a sign that they were lacking in confidence. Yang Chendong, who had seen everything, suddenly snorted. "Do you really have the courage? If I let you lead your troops out of the city to fight, how confident are you in winning?" This. When Tao Jin and the other 3 heard that Yang Chendong was sending them out of the city to fight, they were momentarily speechless. Sometimes it was one thing to boast, but it was another thing to actually do it. Take them for example. Usually, they were full of vigor when dealing with disobedient commoners in the city. However, if they were to really fight against Walla, perhaps before they even reached the battlefield, they would be so scared that their legs would go soft. Tao Jin and the other 3 were a little hesitant, but Sun Tong directly stood up and said with an imposing voice, "We are paid by the Imperial court. If there is a war, we will fight." You are not bad." After looking at Sun Tong for a while,
Yang Chendong's face showed a trace of a smile. With Sun Tong taking the lead, the other four were not as confident, but at this time, they could only express their stance one by one, saying that if there was an order, they would obey. Yang Chendong did not take Tao Jin and the other three's stance to heart.
The sixth young Master Yang, who had personally been on the battlefield and completed countless missions, knew very well what kind of people could be used and what kind of people could not be used on the battlefield.
There was a saying that one should not be afraid of a wolf-like opponent, but a pig-like teammate. Since he knew the temperament of Tao Jin and the other three, Yang Chendong naturally knew what to do next. Good, Marquis has seen everyone's performance. Next, we will make appropriate work arrangements according to each of your conditions. When the time comes, you only need to obey the military orders. Come, serve the dishes.
After understanding the situation, which was very similar to what the Security Bureau understood, Yang Chendong had a basic understanding of the 5 people in his heart.
Chapter 182.
The dishes were finally ready to be served, and the atmosphere was no longer oppressive. On the contrary, because the dishes were all very expensive, and some of them were even dishes that the 5 of them had heard about but could not afford due to their lack of money, everyone began to wolf down the food. Once the wine was served, the 5 of them began to toast Yang Chendong to express their respect as subordinates. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Chendong divided everyone's work while drinking with the 5 of them. Based on what he had said, other than Sun Tong, who was working with him against Walla's army, the other 4 commanders would each take 200 men to maintain order in the capital. Even though the warden's office had transferred many soldiers from the 5 cities to the battlefield in the last 2 wars, each commander originally had more than 1,000 men under their command. Now that only 200 men had been left behind, their authority had been greatly reduced, but none of the 4 complained. This was because they did not need to go to the battlefield to face a battle of life and death. As long as they could stay alive, it didn't matter how many soldiers they led. After figuring out the thoughts of the 5 men, Yang Chendong took away their military power after a meal, and transferred 4,200 warriors from the warden's office of the 5 cities to serve him. How could Tao Jin and the other 3 not see that Yang Chendong was seizing military authority? But none of them expressed any objection. This was their so-called tacit understanding. As long as they could stay alive, they didn't care if their authority was reduced or not. After obtaining the military authority of the 5 cities' warden's office, Yang Chendong had accomplished his first task. After sending off the 5 of them, his second order was to open the gates and allow the common people to freely choose whether to leave or stay. Originally, when the main gate had been closed, only the side gates had been opened, and a strict inspection had been carried out. But now, the policies at the city gates had undergone a massive change. The commoners could enter and leave the city at any time. Everyone quickly spread the news. In just one day, more than 400 households had left the city. 2,000 to 3,000 of them were commoners. Because of this matter, the eunuchs in the palace received orders from Jianghu to inquire about it. The answer they received was that all of this was done by the Duke of Loyalty. The reason was that if the situation in the city was unstable, once they faced the Walla's army head-on, wouldn't they fall short of success? In order to ensure the absolute safety of the capital, any unstable factors had to be dealt with in advance. When this news reached the palace, first into the ears of Jianghu, then into the ears of Emperor Zhu Qiyu, this matter was quickly ignored. Using Zhu Qiyu's words, one should never doubt the people one used. Since he allowed Yang Chendong to take control of the military, he could do whatever he wanted. He would support him unconditionally. Some of the officials in court disagreed with Yang Chendong's decision to allow the people and merchants to leave the capital. In their view, how could the people leave the city at any time? If this situation continued to spread and the capital became an empty city, how could the Walla's army defend the city when it attacked? Wouldn't they just be waiting for death? Wasn't letting the people leave the city the same as digging one's own grave? Most people had similar thoughts. Soon, memorials to impeach Yang Chendong were spread all over Zhu Qiyu's desk. Regretfully, at this crucial moment, Emperor Daizong didn't even glance at these memorials, expressing his complete trust in Yang Chendong. He had not received any imperial edict to stop him. On the second day, even more people left the city. In just half a day, more than 5,000 people had left the city. Most of them were merchants who had business in the capital. Merchants valued profit over justice. In their view,
It didn't matter who ruled over them. What was important was who could bring them benefits. With this traditional mindset, it was no wonder that they would choose to leave the city when a calamity was about to befall the capital. Before leaving the city, most of the people sold some of their properties and goods to Hu Yan and the other girls at a very low price. For a time, the girls were very busy, and Yang Qindong's business began to blossom all over the capital. In just 3 days, more than a quarter of the merchants in the capital had left. The Yang clan had also spent the 5 million taels of silver that they had prepared. Even Jining had spent 2 million taels of the 5 million taels that the emperor had allocated to him. With 7 million taels of silver and the cheap properties of the imperial household that Yang Qindong had obtained from the Bureau of Revenue, 1% of the capital's businesses now belonged to Yang Qindong alone. In just 3 days, the Yang clan's businesses had more than doubled in size. In particular, almost 90% of the businesses on the street between the sky beyond heaven and the immortal abode were now under Yang Qindong's ownership. Even the location of the Yang clan's bank had been decided and renovated according to the loyalty marquis's plan. Many people had taken note of Yang Qindong's actions. But they did nothing to stop him. On the contrary, they watched as things unfolded as if they were watching a show. Emperor Jing, Zhu Qiyu, in particular, was watching all of this from the perspective of a spectator. On the first day that Yang Qindong had made his move, Zhu Qiyu had received a report from Jining. But he was not alarmed. He was happy because the more Yang Qindong invested in the capital, the more confident he was in the defense of the capital. The more money he invested now, the greater his harvest would be in the future. It was precisely because there was no one to stop them that all the plans went smoothly. On the morning of the 4th day, a group of 500 embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes appeared outside the immortal abode. Over the past few days, the immortal abode had become Yang Qindong's resting place. After all, now that he had taken command of the army, he could not return to the Yang clan manor like before. If something happened, wouldn't that delay his plans? It was precisely because Yang Qindong was staying in the immortal abode that the appearance of the 500 embroidered uniform guards caused Tiger's Mane, who was responsible for the young master's safety, to become extremely nervous. He hurriedly sent a message to the nearby company commander Xiao Feng, asking him to hurry over as quickly as possible. At the same time, he also instructed Qiu Vi's first squad of guards and Dao Xiao's second squad on the street across the street to prepare for any sudden changes. After making all the necessary preparations, Tiger's Mane went to see Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong had slept rather late last night after fighting with the 4 women. When Tiger's Mane arrived, he had just finished washing up and was about to eat breakfast. When he saw Tiger's Mane enter the room with a nervous expression, he couldn't help but smile. "What is it? Has the Wallace vanguard arrived?" "Not yet. The people from the Security Bureau have reported that their vanguard is still 200 li away from the capital. They'll probably arrive by nightfall." Tiger's Mane relayed the report to Yang Qindong. When he saw the young master looking at the report from the Security Bureau, he cautiously took half a step forward. "Young master, 500 embroidered uniform guards have arrived. They're currently guarding the entrance. However, I've already sent someone to call company commander Xiao Feng over. We definitely won't let them threaten the safety of this place. The embroidered uniform guards are here." After listening to Tiger's Mane's report, Yang Qindong's face didn't show the slightest bit of surprise. Instead, he said, "This Jining is quite calm. Forget it. Bring their leader in to see Marquis." Tiger's Mane originally thought that when the young master learned that so many embroidered uniform guards had arrived at the entrance, even if he wasn't nervous, he would at least show a certain amount of surprise. He never thought that he would still be so relaxed. Could it be that all of this was within the young master's plan? It must be. In Tiger's Mane's eyes, Yang Qindong was already a godlike existence. In his eyes, whatever the young master said was the truth, and whatever the young master did was the most correct. With this understanding, the originally nervous Tiger's Mane relaxed quite a bit. He nodded and turned to leave. Just as Yang Qindong had predicted, the embroidered uniform guards weren't here to cause trouble. They were here on orders from the head eunuch, Jining, to collect the silver. They'd previously agreed that Jining would receive 1 million silver out of the 5 million taels of silver. She'd also requested that the embroidered uniform guards commander Lu Gue personally come to collect the silver. This morning, Lu Gue had come to complete this mission.
As for the reason he'd put on such a grand display, it was naturally to give Yang Chendong a show of strength and intimidate him. He wanted to let this marquis know that the consequences of provoking the embroidered uniform guards were not to sleep well or eat well. Outside the immortal abode, the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Lu Gui, and Commander Han Ji, were leisurely chatting. "Sir, don't you think the loyalty marquis was scared witless after seeing such a scene? I saw the immortal abode's gates shut after we arrived," Han Ji said to Shangguan Lv Gui in a flattering manner, as if he were a petty person intoxicated with success.
"Humph. He's just a scholar. How brave can he be? Actually, we're doing this for his own good.
We're teaching him a lesson before the Walla's army arrives. We'll let him know what it means to be imposing, what it means to be afraid, and what it means to be timid." Ha ha ha.
Lu Gui couldn't help but throw his head back and roar with laughter. Creak. The immortal abode's gates opened, and the tall tiger's mane walked out.
He strode in front of Lv Gui and Han Ji, then spoke to them in a condescending manner. "The Marquis invites you in."
"Doesn't he have legs? Why doesn't he personally come out to greet our commander?" Seeing that the immortal abode had finally received the brunt of the attack, Han Ji wanted to use his aura to suppress the other party.
However, as soon as the words left his mouth, before he could even reveal the slightest hint of a smile, he felt his vision go black.
Then, he felt a sharp pain in his eye socket. Han Ji stumbled back 3 steps. Chapter 183. A straight punch gave him a black eye. As far as Tiger's mane was concerned, anyone who was disrespectful to the young master deserved to be beaten, regardless of their identity or who they were. Tiger's mane gave Han Ji a punch in public, but it shocked Lv Gui, who was watching the show from the side. Although his subordinate's words were a little arrogant, how could he casually make a move when he had something to say?
It seemed that it was the privilege of the brocade-gowned guards to fight without saying a word.
When was it the turn of others to treat them like this?
"Brat, you're courting death." Feeling that this punch was aimed at the brocade-gowned guard's face, and after feeling that this punch had provoked his dignity, an angry roar came out of Lv Gui's mouth.
As soon as his voice fell, the 2 trusted subordinates pulled out the embroidered spring sabers from their waists. The reaction of the 2 was not slow.
To be able to become the trusted subordinates of the commander among the brocade-gowned guards, if they did not have some skills, how could they be competent?
It was just that they were fast, but some people's reactions were faster than theirs. Just as the sabers were pulled out of the scabbard, 2 muffled sounds came, hitting the embroidered spring sabers that were pulled out. At this time, they saw that the scimitar had already fallen out of their hands and landed on the ground. The 2 trusted subordinates were frightened by this sudden change. They instinctively raised their heads to look, but there was nothing unusual in their eyes.
"What's going on?"
Under the silencer, when the gunshots were fired, outsiders did not hear it. Lv Gui, who was not far away, did not see anything wrong.
All he saw was the action of the 2 trusted subordinates pulling out and throwing the sabers, so he asked angrily.
At this moment, they could not even hold the sabers. It was really a loss of face for the brocade-gowned guards. Being angrily reprimanded by their superior, the 2 trusted subordinates did not dare to argue. They instinctively bent down to pick up the sabers, but just as they took a step forward, 2 muffled sounds came out, hitting in front of the 2 men's feet, raising a cloud of dust. It could be foreseen that if the 2 of them had taken a bigger step just now, the shot would have hit their feet. If that was the case, it would be hard to say if they would still be standing here in one piece.
If the first shot did not make them understand what was going on, then the second shot completely broke their psychological defense, letting them know that they were just flesh and blood, and that they were so close to death.
In an instant, the 2 of them who had been taught a lesson didn't dare to move. They maintained their posture, half-bent and motionless. The first time he shouted, Lv Gui didn't notice anything unusual. But just now, he had seen 2 clouds of dust fly up with his own eyes. After associating it with the results of the brocade guard's investigation, if he still didn't know what had happened, then his position as commander really wouldn't be given to such a fool. He knew that it must be the effect of the new firearms. At this moment, cold sweat kept breaking out on his forehead. In his heart, he kept asking, what kind of firearm is this? Why is it so accurate, and when it was shot, it didn't make any sound? Then, if this thing wanted to deal with him, wouldn't he have lost his life here? Lv Gui was also frightened. Even when his subordinate maintained a somewhat ridiculous posture, he didn't reprimand him. On the other hand, Han Ji, who had been beaten, didn't see any of this and naturally didn't know what had happened. Seeing that he had been beaten and his superior didn't care, he angrily roared, "What are you all standing there for? Capture this person. He dares to provoke the brocade guard. He deserves to die. Yes, let's go together." After the other brocade guard heard Han Ji's order, they all shouted and pulled out their long swords, intending to attack. On the other hand, LV Gue saw the faint smile on the tiger's mane's face from the corner of his eye, and his heart trembled. "All of you stop. Put your swords away. Put them away." After what had just happened, he was very clear that if he chose to make a move right now, he and the other brocade guard would be the first to fall. Therefore, he hurriedly shouted and strode over to the black-eyed Han Ji. He swung his hand and gave him a slap. Slap. This slap was extremely solid. After the slap, LV Gue loudly reprimanded, "What are you shouting for? With me here, you don't have the right to speak." How could Han Ji know that LV Gue had only slapped him because he was on his side? The slap was painful, and a bloody handprint was left on his face. However, what hurt even more was the confusion and grievance in his heart. After the slap, LV Gue didn't pay him any more attention. Instead, he walked over to the tiger's mane's side. At this moment, he was like a completely different person. With a smile on his face, he said, "I'll have to trouble you to lead the way. Follow me." Seeing that his display of strength was effective, the tiger's mane didn't waste any more words with LV Gue. He nodded lightly, then turned around and walked into the interior of the immortal abode. LV Gue left, leaving behind Han Ji and the several hundred brocade guards standing there, looking at each other. They didn't understand. Wasn't he here to show off his strength to the loyal Marquis? How did it end up like this? How did he become someone who didn't fight back when he was hit or cursed? LV Gue entered the immortal abode and went up to the second floor, arriving at the private room where Yang Chendong had received him. As soon as he entered, the first thing he saw was Yang Chendong's back, clad in green robes. Even though he knew that LV Gue had walked in, Yang Chendong still didn't turn around. Instead, he said, "Commander, you really are stupid." HM? LV Gue, who'd been reprimanded as soon as he entered the room, was first confused, then angry. No matter what, he was still the commander of the brocade guard. He had great authority, and he had the authority to arrest court officials and even dukes and marquises. He could execute them first and report later. So why was it that he'd been given the cold shoulder here? Then he'd been warned in secret. Now that he'd finally met the person in question, he hadn't even seen his true face? Why was he being reprimanded? With his status, even Jining had to treat him with a smile when assigning him a mission. Who did this young Chendong think he was? He was just a young man who hadn't even grown out his hair yet. Although he had military authority, his position in the brocade guard was still below his own. How dare he speak to him like this? With a face full of anger, he was just about to express his stance and even reprimand Yang Chendong when the Marquis of Loyal Courage, whose back was to him, spoke again. "Since you've come to take eunuch Jin's silver, with your status, you should know that this matter is confidential. Yet, you still brought so many people here with great fanfare. Do you want everyone in the world, including the Emperor, to know about this matter?" With this question, LV Gue, who'd been about to retort, immediately shut his mouth. He suddenly remembered that he'd come today to take the silver, but he seemed to have come to show off. Had things been ruined? Seeing LV Gue's face turn red and green, Yang Chendong laughed coldly in his heart. He laughed at the other's ignorance of the immensity of heaven and earth. He laughed at the other's selfishness over the public good. This kind of person was the existence he despised the most in his heart. A person could have a temper and personality, but everything had to be under the condition that it didn't affect the general situation. If one's personality ruined things, then that was unforgivable. LV Gue had made this mistake. Yang Chendong naturally had to seize this opportunity to properly educate the other party. Coming here with great fanfare to ask for money, those who don't know might think that the embroidered uniform guards are openly asking for bribes. Once this matter spreads, what will those imperial censors and ministers who hate you to the bone do? Is there even a need for Marquis to say anything? Yang Chendong's voice was cold as he stared at LV Gue with a confused expression. This official was too rash. LV Gue's face was pale, and cold sweat poured down his forehead.
If things really were as Yang Chendong said, that he'd brought 500 embroidered uniform guards with him and left with 1,000,000 taels of silver from the immortal abode, then the commotion it would cause might even cost him his head.
As for the matter of him taking the silver for eunuch Jining, who would believe him if he told them? Not only that, eunuch Jining would probably be the first to make a move on him. His head almost fell off his shoulders as he thought about it. The one who'd saved his life was Yang Chendong. LV Gue didn't blame Yang Chendong in the slightest. On the contrary, he felt some gratitude. You really were too rash. When encountering a problem, you have to think carefully about how to deal with it. You have to plan carefully before you act. All right, you can go now. I'll arrange for people to send the silver out of the immortal abode in batches. You can arrange for reliable people to wait outside to receive it. Yang Chendong naturally understood the principle of overdoing it, so he waved his hand and made a gesture that said, "You can leave now." Yang Chendong's words had already left LV Gue ashamed. He didn't want to stay here any longer. When he saw Yang Chendong's gesture, he hurriedly nodded and thanked him, then left the immortal abode. Outside the gates, Han Ji and the other embroidered uniform guards were still clamoring. When they saw that LV Gue hadn't come out even after going in for a while, they were even more worried about the commander's safety. They wanted to enter the immortal abode to investigate. Yang Si and Yang Wu, who were in charge of guarding the gates, obviously wouldn't agree to Han Ji's request. They stood in front of the immortal abode with Qiu Vi and the others, blocking everyone's path. Oh! When he saw that someone still dared to block the embroidered uniform guard's path, Han Ji was inwardly delighted. However, he pretended to be angry and turned to the embroidered uniform guards behind him. Brothers, do you see this? There's someone who doesn't give the embroidered uniform guard's face and dares to block our path. Tell me, what should we do? Charge in. Arrest anyone who dares block our path and throw them into the Imperial prison. The embroidered uniform guards behind him were all roused by Han Ji's words. They all glared at him, unwilling to back down. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.